Hey everybody, welcome to another episode, actually a live stream episode of the Ask a Cycling Coach podcast. Thanks for joining us on YouTube and Facebook. We're back on YouTube this week. Thanks for the patience with all the technical difficulties we were having there, but it's fixed now. So we're glad to have you with us. And while you're joining us on the live stream, you can send in any questions you have or comments or anything else. Just do so in the comments below whatever you're watching right now, or to the side if you're on Facebook. And we'll get to those questions after we record the podcast. A number of you also have joined the Facebook group. You can look, it's the TrainerRoad's Ask a Cycling Coach podcast Facebook group, shortest name in the world, very easy to look up. But you can look that up on Facebook and join. We have a Facebook group there where we're sharing insight and some behind the scenes stuff, but also some deeper insights into the things we talk about on the podcast. It's a spot where you can get coaching and all this other stuff, this kind of all that knowledge that revolves around that. We're trying to make it a hub for that. So you can check that out and join as well. Are we ready to start the proper podcast?
Born ready.
Oh, I like it. Welcome to the podcast. It's dedicated to making you a faster cyclist, the Ask a Cycling Coach podcast presented by TrainerRoad. I'm Coach Jonathan Lee with our head coach, Chad Timmerman.
Hi, everybody.
Back from Mexico.
Mexico.
Very, you're golden.
Yeah.
He looks more tan.
Like half a shade less white.
Yeah. You're less white, slightly pink. Just kidding.
And that's our CEO, Nate Pearson.
Hello.
And we are going to answer more of your cycling and triathlon related questions today. You can submit them at trainerroad.com/podcast. Before we get into the questions that we have prepared for today, a number of things that we want to share with you all. We've made, and we just mentioned this to the live listeners, we do a live stream, by the way, every week. You can join it on our Facebook and YouTube channels. But we just mentioned this to the live listeners, but we actually have a Facebook group now for the podcast. So it's a spot where all of you can jump in there. You can join. We'll have insights, behind the scenes stuff, even some like live Q&As eventually that are just like, smaller scale stuff. Like every once in a while, Chad and I will hop into this room, maybe something like that. We'll answer some questions that you might have. And it's also a spot where all of you can share the things that you're doing to get faster, that sort of thing, so then we can all learn from each other. That's the goal. It's called TrainerRoad's Ask a Cycling Coach podcast Facebook group. Very, very quick.
But you can, if you type in TrainerRoad podcast, it comes up.
It's pretty easy to find. So please go and join that, and we'll be going through there. It's not, I wouldn't say that this is a spot for you to submit the questions that you're submitting to the podcast already. Continue to do that at trainerroad.com/podcast. But this is a spot for you guys to share things that you're learning, or if you have like more like less specific perhaps questions, or it's like, this is my event. I have this many weeks to train. Which training plan should I follow, or how should I adjust it, that sort of thing. More general than that, or anything else, send those in, and then we'll give it a shot.
The most important thing is there's a poll in there.
Oh, yes.
Talk about the poll you made, Jonathan.
Yeah, there's two things. Some interesting stuff that we talked about before we get to the poll.
Okay.
Last week, we actually talked about the criterium that we raced, and we talked about, we kind of analyzed some stuff, and we put that down on paper and have some screenshots and some further insights too. And I looked into my performance with a critical eye, and did a number of things wrong, and I think it's a great example of whenever people just let results and just focus on the result, and they're results driven rather than data driven, you miss the point.
You could be like, I won, there's nothing I can improve on.
Exactly.
Yeah. But there's a one, I can still improve.
Totally. And so you can go on there and check that out. We actually break down so you can see the effect of the cornering stuff we were talking about with Nate, why that cornering and leaving that space open or hunting for lines, how that was costing him. And then when he smoothed out, how that changed. Anyway, that stuff's up there. But then there's also a poll. I think you all know that, or listeners to the podcast, what the poll is. It's who's going to win the 40K TT challenge. If you're Team Chad, if you're Team Nate, or you're Team Jonathan. And Chad, you're killing us right now. So not many folks.
Chad,
are there yet,
both good and bad.
Yeah, we just opened this group, and so there's not many people in the group yet.
I didn't even know about it until about 5 minutes ago.
Chad has 10 votes. I have 4 votes, but one of them is me, and one of them is Jonathan. It's like my mom voted for me.
Bolstering the numbers.
Yeah.
All right.
So I really have 2, and Jonathan has 4.
Okay.
Yep.
I guess I should start riding my bike again.
Oh, dang, man.
On vacation.
It's I know, it's just impressive. You're leading and you aren't even riding.
Refreshed for your final build.
Oh, yeah. No, I'm ready to roll.
Yeah.
Freshness is high.
Do some work.
Yep.
That's it. So go check that out. Once again, the TrainerRoad Ask a Cycling Coach podcast Facebook group. You can find it on there. In addition, we have another live podcast, like a live event where all of you can come and attend. It's upcoming. It's exciting. We've been waiting to announce the details because it's getting kind of closer down to, or we wanted to make sure we have everything in line. But for those that don't know, the most popular mountain bike series in the country right now is the Epic Ride series. And they have like the Whiskey Off-Road, Grand Junction Off-Road, Carson City Off-Road, a new one called Oz Trails back east in Arkansas, east-ish, Midwest. And they're the same folks that do 24 Hours in Old Pueblo. Mm-hmm. They basically put on a party, and he even said, when I was talking to Todd Sada, the founder, he said, we've been accused of throwing an awesome party with a bike race nearby. And so they're a ton of fun. The whole weekend, the downtown area of Carson City during the Carson City Off-Road is taken over by a fat tire crit, concerts going constantly, really cool stuff, ton of fun. So at the Carson City Off-Road on Saturday, June 16th, after we race, which I thought of this is a problem. We're going to be on the on the main stage before the headlining band, and we're going to have post-race. So, and last year post-race, I think I just crawled into a dark hole and disappeared.
Yeah, I've never seen you so negative in my life.
It was rough, man.
You were ready to quit cycling, and
it was rough. Then we went to Five Guys, and I was resurrected by burgers and fries.
Yep.
And I looked like I was suffering from heat stroke. Apparently.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Nate kept asking me.
Are you okay? Yeah, you were bright, even more pink than you are now.
Yeah.
It was so hard.
You're not that pink.
It was so hot. It was rough. Hopefully the heat isn't that bad, and hopefully I do a better job of fueling, hydrating, and acclimatizing to heat beforehand. I've already actually stopped using the fan quite as often when I train. So anyways, we're going to be on the live stage before the headlining band. We're like the opening act, so to speak. And it's going to be...
Sorry, everyone.
It's going to be...
Apologies in advance. Right? Who's going to really pump up the band? I don't know what band it is, but they're going to be like, okay.
Here we go.
Thanks, guys.
It's going to be mountain biking with the pros, just like we did cyclocross with the pros when they came for Cross Nationals here in Reno. We're going to do one with mountain biking. We haven't decided on the final guests yet, but we're going to have... I assume in one case we're probably going to have a current national champion on, which will be exciting. And we're looking to have a male and a female and get that all sorted. It's going to be a ton of fun. Like an open Q&A format in one respect, or I should say it's like a panel. Like we're going to ask them questions. They're going to provide questions, but then we're also going to have some time for open Q&A. It's going to be a ton of fun. It's going to be unique doing something on a big stage in front of an audience. So like a big audience, like bigger than the one that we had here in our office. So it'll be pretty fun. So that's Saturday, June 16th. It's going to be right after award ceremonies, right before the headlining band. So sometime around 4:30 to 5 o'clock, I believe is the exact time, or is the time. We'll get you details later. So if you're going to be around for that event or you want to come and see us, anything else like that, that's a great time to do it. And then, yeah, I guess that kind of covers it. The next bit.
You were at the Tour of California. It came up to... Lake Tahoe,
yes,
which is like 45 minutes from us. Maybe it was an hour drive from our office.
Yeah, it was like an hour drive.
I think you were at the top of the final. It was, what was it? The stage 5?
Yes, I believe so. Or
yep, the pivotal stage.
Yes, yeah.
And you were on top of the pivotal climb.
Yeah.
Did you see anything?
Yeah, it was 125 miles and 16,000 feet of climbing. Okay. Absolutely brutal.
That's
day.
A lot of climbing.
So much. So, and the interesting thing was it was so long, and we didn't figure the racing would be too aggressive, which it wasn't. And then we figured that the fireworks would happen on that final decisive climb. It's called Kingsbury Grade. It's even part of our local Hill Climb TT series. It's hard. It averages just around 7%, and it's about 7 miles long. So it's a hard climb. Two things that I want to share, though, that we got to the top. First of all, Katie Hall is freaking amazing. How fast she was going over that climb was absolutely jaw-dropping.
She had a huge gap, too, right?
Oh, my. Yeah, well, she had one other rider with her. But it was mind-blowing to see how aggressively she was attacking that. Mm-hmm. And, man, she was putting the other girl in the pain cave. But just absolutely impressive to see that, how fast they go over the top. Like, so much faster than I've ever gone up that. It's funny, I think when a lot of guys watch women's cycling, they're like, oh, yeah, they're probably not as fast.
Yeah, I could go that fast. Yeah.
Nope. You would get dropped so hard, like so hard. But then the main things that I wanted to share was the positive attitude that I saw with some riders, like Alexander Kristoff, like, big guy, like sprinter, right? Like has no place being happy or enthusiastic at the top of a climb like that on a day like that, right? But that guy was charging over the top. He was enthusiastic. He even like gave a head nod to the crowd, like because the crowd was there and pretty big and loud and everything else. Really cool to see. And then I won't say any names, but there were sprinters in the back at the gruppetto, just with the broom wagon right behind them, and you could tell, like, sure, they might have been having a bad day, whatever else, but some of them looked so, I've never seen somebody so unhappy in my life as one of these sprinters. like I basically looked at them, I was like, they must hate bicycles. Like there's no way, right?
They hate 16,000 feet of climbing.
It's true, right? But at the same time, I feel like there were guys that were huge, that were further up the road, and they shouldn't have been doing that. And it's amazing to see. And even some folks that looked like they were just suffering, but then they embraced the crowd in that moment. And I feel like you can have all the fitness in the world, but if you partner that with a bad attitude, then you're handicapping yourself. And then the last thing was the descending speed of the pros. So we didn't get to descend with the pros. We were trying, and then the cops stopped us, so we couldn't. Kind of sucked.
The cops stopped you?
Yeah, we weren't going to like drop in with them, but just right behind them, you know.
Mm-hmm.
So then once the cops let us go, it was way too big of a gap, and they were gone. But I pedaled pretty hard. I think that I averaged something like almost 300 watts down this descent, right? And I'm a pretty good descender, and I was just barely off. Like I was a handful of seconds off the pace of the guys that were just coasting down in the gruppetto in the back. Number one, I mean, aerodynamics really helps and everything else, but these guys are just so good at descending as well in terms of how they carry speed, and they don't need to brake and everything else because they just pick proper line choice.
Did you use brakes at all?
There are 2 turns where you absolutely have to use brakes on that one. They're extremely tight. So.
Could product manager Pete Morris, could he keep up? Because he's a little heavier.
Yeah, Pete would have been able to keep up. I had to work so hard, and there were parts, and I was like pedaling, and I was like 500, 600 watts, and I looked behind him. Pete was coasting, and he was just catching.
Yeah. So. Well, it's 210 versus 140.
146.
46?
7 that day. Yeah, somewhere around there. So, but it's just impressive to see. One like the PGA Tour saying, these guys are good. They had that slogan forever.
Oh, yeah.
Like the top cyclists.
It's another world,
so
right?
It's huge. The chasm between us, like even fast us, and I say us being normal people, and them is just so huge.
Locally, there's like this jump to like 4 watts per kilo, and you're pretty fast. And then there's a couple people locally who are at 5, or maybe 5 sometimes.
Which is a big gap.
It's huge. That is gigantic. And then there's like pro people who are like upper 5s, 6, lower 6, and that is just another huge gap. Like I'm sure everyone's done this. You put in your weight and you're like, what if I was times 6? And mine's like 480 FTP or something like that.
It's a whole different universe.
It's like, it's not going to happen.
Yeah. I had that exact moment. I was reading Jeff Kabush's race diary from Grand Junction Off-Road, and he's talking about the terrible day that he had when he just averaged over like 300 watts or something for that. I was like, that's
84 kilograms times 6 is 504. So my FTP was 504.
That's all you need.
You
World
guys,
class.
500 watt FTP.
Yeah, 6 is pretty high, but still, I'd be good at TTs.
Yes, you would. You'd be very good at TTs. And actually, speaking, that was very good. Clean job.
You're welcome.
We were talking last week about we were looking at the power data, really similar power data, but different times, up Geiger grade,
and on the flat one.
I mean, hilly but fast.
Yeah.
Not a hill climb TT. And so we basically were looking at that. We're like, well, maybe it's aerodynamics. But that was kind of taken out of things a bit because when you look at the average speed of the Boca TT, it's called, the one that was like a road race course versus the average speed of what we did on Geiger, you should see a way bigger difference if it's faster.
Yeah. So just to recap, Chad and I are pretty much the same rider in terms of like drag that we think, weight, similar positions, and tires, wheel choice, everything's kind of the same.
Everything, so similar.
Skin suits, and on a TT, rolling TT, I beat him by just over a minute. But then on a hill climb, I beat him just over by a minute too.
Same margin, yeah.
It was like the same margin, but on both ones we had like the exact same power.
So if it was aerodynamics, those margins should have been different because the speed was so different.
If it was aerodynamics, like I had, because I did have an aero bike and he didn't, then I would think on the hill climb TT we would be the same, or very, very close. But on the really fast one where we averaged 24 or 23 or whatever, we would have been a bigger gap.
Whereas on the hill climb, we're like 12, 13, 14 miles an hour.
So you just went on vacation, you left your bike in your office, and we have a certified 25 kilogram weight to 2 grams. So I was going to hang that weight from your cranks, and I was going to hang it from my cranks and look at the Quark app to see what the torque is on that, to see if there was something different. The D0,
which is the new Quark model,
does not have that feature anymore. So before you'd be able to like hang a weight and you'd be able to set like a new slope for your power meter, but it's gone.
I could see how people could screw that up.
Oh yeah, most people don't. It was expensive to get a certified weight because your weight has to be accurate, and the weights you get at like the gym aren't 2 grams, right?
Exactly, and you need to the gram.
Yep.
Yeah.
And we got this one specific for that. So, and I was looking at your bike, and I was like, you have asymmetric rings on it.
Ovalized rings, yeah.
Ovalized rings, yeah.
So what are those, Jonathan?
Yeah, so the ones that you have are rotors, Q rings, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then you can, the clever thing about those is that you can adjust where the oval sits.
4 different positions, yeah.
Basically. And so the theory behind, so there's a couple of different reasons why people want round rings. The marketing pitch is that your legs don't operate perfectly in circles. In other words, like the same amount of torque and ability to put out torque in a circle. So you need something oval to then better utilize your natural biomechanics and then thusly make you more efficient on the bike. The other side of things as well is that if you're on like gravel or dirt, like on a gravel bike or a mountain bike, that it smooths out torque delivery to the rear wheel, and as a result then improves traction. And if you have a full suspension bike, then it would also keep more even chain tension and thusly eliminate pedal bob a bit as well with that smoother torque delivery. But in this case, you don't care about the mixed surface benefits or pedal bob because you're on a road bike, right?
Correct.
And how long have you been using? So I've used oval rings on the mountain bike. I'm not using them now, not because I'm like, oh, I need to get away from those things. I'm just using round because round's what I got. But when did you switch over to them? And then why do you like them?
It's probably been a good 6-7 years. I've been using them for quite a long time.
Wow.
And I've vacillated between round rings and the ovalized rings for various reasons. And every time I stray away from them, knee problems are a bit more prominent. Every time I go back to them, my knee problems go away. So for whatever reason, they seem to work for me and cause less knee stress. So for that reason alone, I'm kind of married to them. I love them.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's knowing about knee problems extremely, very intimately, it's a pain. So, and I just want to say one thing too. When I switched to them on my mountain bike so for the past 2 years, I was on oval rings, and I'm on round now on my current mountain bike. It was for the benefits that I talked about for mountain biking, not the physiological benefits or biomechanical ones. And I noticed 2 things, and I'm curious to know if you've noticed this, Chad. Number one, I felt like if I got on top of the gear, is a saying that a lot of people say, but what I'm getting at there is like when you feel like you're spinning quickly, not like being drugged down. I felt like it was easy, like the chain rings kind of wanted you to stay there. Like it almost feels like to maintain a higher cadence, it almost feels more natural. Not necessarily easier, but more natural, I guess.
I do notice, excuse me, a more fluid pedaling style in general, and that could be one and the same, basically what you're describing.
And then I find on the opposite end, like at single track 6, when I was just drugged down, when we were drugged down to those steep climbs, I felt like if I got behind the curve, and I was just dragging and I couldn't shift down anymore, I felt like it punished me more. Like it was like even harder. And that all depends though on where the oval's at, because the oval in relation to where your cranks go, in some cases they position it where you have more torque, readily available torque. So we're talking like if you're on a clock, somewhere around like 12 to 4 o'clock type of a thing. They want to position the oval there so it acts like a bigger chainring when you have more torque available. And then where you have less torque available, it will act like a smaller chainring. So they'll position the oval in that direction. And you obviously can change that around.
Yeah, I've never changed it actually. I always use the recommended setting, and I've just never felt compelled to stray from it.
Makes sense. So that's the oval ring stuff. It's very much a horses for courses type of thing. There isn't much data in terms of that this is by far and away the better way for the human body to operate or anything else. There's not a whole lot of concrete stuff.
It's more anecdotal. Some people love them.
Yep. Froome seems to love them. But the one thing that we did find out that does have data behind it helped us understand this whole situation.
Yeah. Is that
do you want to go into it?
Just in general, those I've read before, those rings overinflate your power numbers. The having the like. Do you want to explain it, Jonathan?
Totally can.
Okay,
Yeah. So basically, the numbers themselves, we talked to Cork at Cork directly, and they said that they see anywhere from, so they guarantee 1.5%, I should say, accuracy with all their power meters. If it doesn't meet 1.5%, it doesn't go out of their factory. So, and then, they just ship out ones that do follow that. And they say with round rings, 1 to 3% is absolutely common, but it sounds like 3% is more common. And then the specific individual I talked to said, but it's totally not uncommon to see 5% anywhere around there. That's pretty common to see. So in this case, it inflates your power data. And the reason for that is because these power meters even pedal-based ones, so this is important to recognize. It's not just crank-based, but even pedal-based ones, they assume that there's this circle that you're operating upon when they're measuring torque and everything else. And when it's not a perfect circle, then that throws things off. And basically what you have is you have like spiking torque that's higher than lower than where it should be. And since it's not operating on a perfectly, round circle, so to speak, then that throws it off, and that's what inflates it, basically.
Makes good sense.
Garmin's got a comment about that, of saying that they can't guarantee the accuracy if you put it on
Ovalized rings.
Ovalized rings, yeah.
Okay.
Which is kind of funny. You'd think that, well, it's pedal-based, like it should be fine, but they even operate on the same, it's all math, right? They operate on the same stuff.
So what we did is, we're in the best bike split, look at the gap for when we did our hill climb, and I said, how, for me to go that much slower, how many less watts would I have to put out?
In other words, for your time to equal Chad's time,
Yep.
how many? Yep.
And it was, I believe it was 13 watts, which is exactly like 3% of our power output.
Really?
Yeah. So, and then do you use these on your TT bike?
I do, yeah. So
Yeah.
cross bikes and...
So everyone who's going to go vote in the Ask a Cycling Coach podcast.
Chad's watts are small.
Not small.
Not at all. No, they're
Just
much
not
larger than
the
mine.
same as mine.
Yeah, that all stacks up, though. I mean, if
Yeah,
you're going
makes sense,
faster and
right?
all of the things are pretty equal, you got to
Yep.
be putting out more power. So
Yep.
that makes sense.
But it makes perfect sense, right? Because if the normal is 3, exactly 3 would put us within like 4 seconds of each other. The only thing I'm going to say to this about the vote is I've been having bad workouts on my TT bike. My road bike's coming back up, feeling good and strong. But the TT bike, man, it's so hard.
It feels like it just doesn't budge.
It doesn't budge.
Like
right?
you're just like, I suck
Well, you know
just
what
as
it
much
is?
as I did yesterday.
You know what it is, though?
before.
I'm only doing it like once a week.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm doing like once a week. And my road bike power, I'm doing all the other days, and it
Yeah.
keeps going up. And then the once a week. And sometimes I do it when I'm tired once
Yeah.
a week. And then it's just...
Well, we've talked about it. I mean, we should have had the time trial by now, or actually it should be this weekend, right? Based
Yeah.
on what we were planning originally.
Yeah.
So we had folded this all into our plans, and we're trying to mix various disciplines in and trying to balance the training demands of those different disciplines. It's
the hard part
tricky.
is because I'm also, I don't know if you get this too, Jonathan, but I want to be light for Carson City and for
a tough one.
and Lost and Found next weekend.
Really everything but the time trial.
Right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Everything.
Yeah, right? It's kind of tricky.
Okay.
On that TT thing, sorry, one thing really quick. When you were talking about how like you feel like it doesn't budge, after doing like, workout after workout, that scene from Office Space came into my mind where he's like, so every day of your life is the worst day ever? And he's like, yes. Is today the worst day? Yes, it's the worst. That's kind of how I felt. Like the workouts just wouldn't get better. So, but anyways, that's interesting stuff. And also something that we should know is a power meter is effective as long as it's consistent in terms of structuring your training and everything else. So comparing power meters, even round rings to round rings, is always it can be somewhat problematic because they'll be a little bit different. So even though power is the most comparable way, or comparable measure that we have, it's not like you can just throw away everything and just say apples are apples, so to speak. You still have to have some sort of variance in there.
Especially like if we're comparing the power numbers and they're within like 2 watts and we're like, oh, you went faster. How'd you go slower on 2 watts? That's not 1.5% accuracy. When you get to like 300 watts, 400 watts, that's actually a pretty big range. Yeah,
sure.
Absolutely. So, but yeah, as long as it's consistent day to day, you personally are still reaping the benefit of having a power meter. That's the important thing. So, this one actually, so we'll get straight into the questions now. This one's from Chris. He says, hi guys, my wife is an avid cyclist and is 20 weeks pregnant. She is interested in what competitive women cyclists do during pregnancy to maintain fitness and after pregnancy to regain fitness. Thanks, Chris. I don't have any experience in this. I mean, none of us personally do here, but...
Okay, disclaimer, talk to your doctor, of course, about
Obviously,
exercising.
yeah.
And I can tell you what my wife did.
Yeah.
My wife trained all the way through pregnancy, running, swimming, cycling.
Didn't change a thing.
Didn't change a thing. And then afterwards, one was a C-section, one wasn't. It was, doctor said wait X weeks, and she waited probably a quarter of that time and went back into it. Because she's crazy.
Complication-free births, childbirths, and your kids are both healthy.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Gotcha. So Chad, and first of all, I guess we should put a call out to to any women who have personally actually have some insights that they'd like to share with Chris and his wife, you can just send them in TrainerRoad.com/podcast. And then what we can do is we can send that over to Chris. We can connect those dots. But that said, we did some research just to look into, or I should say Chad did some research to look into this. Chad, do you want to, I guess, where should we start off with this?
I mean, we're already leaning toward it, which you really don't have to change a whole lot. It does vary from trimester to trimester, and there are reasons for that I'll get into briefly.
This is what Stacy Sims says, right?
I'm getting into that. Yep,
cool.
yep. The consensus, regardless of who, is you can get away with a fair amount of exercise and a fair amount of intensity also. 30 to 45 minutes a day, 4 to 5 days a week. The Journal of Obstetrics and Gynecology says exactly that. And then Stacy Sims backs up a lot of this in her book Roar, which if you haven't read this, it's a useful resource on a lot of these matters that are women specific, but plenty of it carries to athletes in general. She co-wrote it with Celine Yeager, who also has a lot of insights over the course of the book. So it's a good read, and there's a lot of information in there. In particular, the information relative to exercising during pregnancy. She just talks about there being three concerns, kind of the three H's: hypoxemia, hypoglycemia, and hyperthermia. So basically, the amount of oxygen that's in the blood and the amount of oxygen that's going to the baby, it's not much of a concern. You really can't push yourself hard enough to merit concern in that area.
So the whole concept of like Phil and Paul always say oxygen debt whenever you're watching.
And that you're starving the baby of oxygen. There are physiological mechanisms in place that kind of keep that from happening. I imagine under extremes you could force some of these things into dangerous territory, but it's not likely. A lot of this boils down to sensibility. If it's super hard on you, it's probably going to be hard on your body in general, and perhaps hard on your child inside as well. Hypoglycemia being low blood sugar. I mean, that impacts exercise in general. So these limitations kind of force themselves on you regardless of whether you're pregnant or not. And then hyperthermia is probably the biggest concern, overheating and overheating the child. But again, if it's overheating you, then ease up. Be sensible about this. You're carrying a child inside. So none of this was groundbreaking, like, I didn't think I could possibly do these things. They all make sense. Pregnancy does impose certain limits on performance. So it kind of, again, handles itself. You're not going to be able to put yourself in a spot that's going to be threatening to your child without actually threatening your own well-being. So kind of irons out.
I believe, side note, and this is very morbid, but I think in the first trimester, and someone can correct me in the comments, but you actually get some hormone boosts that you perform better. And there were some like Russian Olympics where they would like be pregnant and then get an abortion. You had to like kind of try to peak for.
Oh my goodness!
Isn't that crazy?
I got nothing on that. That's
terrible. Yeah, it's. I think that like
great lengths right there.
Looking at I should say, my wife, we have one child, and looking at what she went through and everything else. Something that I want to mention with this is. There were days when my wife would feel like on top of the world, and she felt like she could exercise to to the nth degree. And there were other days where she just felt
and that's a point that Stacy Sims makes. That some days it doesn't matter how bad you want it; it's just not going to happen. And most of that is not simply limited to the first trimester, but a lot of what's the morning sickness and the low energy and all that stuff does associate with the first trimester. They say they get into the second trimester and all this stuff starts to rebound. The morning sickness is gone. The energy levels start to come back up. Exercise starts to go a bit better. But that first trimester can be especially challenging. I didn't see anything that said high intensity is a good idea. Right. They capped all of this at 70 to 85% of max heart rate. So we're talking like 6 to 7 on a Borg scale, 1 to 10 scale. So when I talk about intensity, maintaining high intensity, I don't mean high intensity. I mean within reason, 85% of max heart rate.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And then what else?
Something else that I've recognized too with what like my wife went through is just especially when we got into the third trimester, it just got so difficult to do hardly anything, but she still mentioned that she would get a boost every time, that she would do it. So it was like it was a tricky thing where like your body is just taking care of a process that is entirely foreign, so complicated, so demanding, everything else, that understanding the usually how athletes, they weigh how they feel and they can understand it. It's really hard to get a good fix on that. And it's also pretty easy to run yourself down. So just looking at the experience of what my wife went through and everything else, like especially when you're getting closer to that third trimester, you really have to listening to your body is tricky. So that the caution that we always preach with this stuff becomes even more important.
Well, and then as they get bigger too, I mean, it changes their center of balance, and their flexibility changes a bit. The relaxin hormone, the stuff that either way, certain things change over the course of it, which is really an argument in favor of indoor training. I mean, obviously, you're not going to want to do anything that's particularly technically challenging
or dangerous.
You don't want to go mountain biking, risk anything that could involve a fall. And then as your balance becomes more challenged, as your weight gets redistributed differently, as your postural muscles are taxed in different manners, make it simpler. More stable environments and lower impact.
My wife did a lot of swimming too.
Yeah, sure.
At the end,
it's
a lot easier to. Because even with the bike, sometimes if you're in an aggressive position, it can be kind of hard.
Sure.
Or at least
yeah.
We're talking. There's so many women laughing at us right now.
Well, that's one of the modifications, though. I'm glad you brought that up. Is that a higher position? I mean, obviously, that weight's already pulling you forward, and then you're going to put yourself in a more prone position, which makes it all the more difficult. Yeah. So little tweaks over the course of it, but the gist of it is you can basically maintain. You can keep on doing what you're doing. Short of the high intensity work, you can maintain your training schedule, dial back the intensity a bit, pay attention to the days that you don't feel good. Don't push yourself to get on the bike simply because a workout's scheduled. You don't feel like it. There's a lot of new stresses on your body over the course of 9 months of gestation.
I know that's something that's changed too over the years. Is I think back in the olden days it was you need to be resting. Don't work out.
That was the old
by the doctor for both pregnancies. My wife, she saw a bunch of doctors. She had a stroke before, so she had like a high risk pregnancy and stuff. And they all said, work out. Like, please work out. You should work out.
Yeah.
But again, talk to your doctor.
My assumption is you're working with a gynecologist or an obstetrician. So you have somebody who should specifically be able to tell you. If they fly in the face of any of this advice, maybe do a little of your own research or consider a new doctor. Unless, that's not for me to advise you on. But the fact is your doctor should be able to back up most of what we just said.
Absolutely. And then if you have any personal experience with this and you want to share some advice or information or experience with Chris and his wife, once again, just submit that to us, TrainerRoad.com/podcast, and you can submit a question there.
The last thing
a comment
I want to say for Chris is I know in triathlon, a lot of high-level triathletes have kids come back and still do maybe even better than they did before.
Look at Liz Lyles.
Yeah, exactly.
That's common.
Yeah, very common for high-level endurance athletes to come back as fit or stronger than before they had a kid.
Yep, absolutely. Next one is from Chase. He says, I work 12 and 8-hour shifts in a very busy ER, so I'm on my feet the majority of the time. That sounds very stressful. He says, does the constant walking have an effect on recovery? When possible, is it better to perform my workouts on the same days that I work so my rest days are mostly free from activity? One thing I wanted to get into really quick is this is a great example. This is kind of an extreme example of people. Usually you think, well, if I train, I'm working, and then when I'm not training, I'm recovering. Like in an ideal world, yes. If you're a pro cyclist and you can do that, like Taylor Finney paints, and I don't even know, he might even paint from a couch, right? But that's like what he does when he's not riding, right? So but the majority of us don't have that reality. And this brings into a great example of your work. Are you actually recovering, or is it just more stress?
It boils down to the quality of your recovery. And I wouldn't consider working at 8, much less a 12-hour shift on your feet, anything that resembles recovery.
Especially in a stressful ER situation.
Yeah, certainly not.
Oh.
No, I mean, the psychological stress on top and the mental stress on top of being on your feet. So the physical stress is it's far from recovery. So in terms of how do you group your workouts to maximize your recovery, then you got to balance out with, how much of an impact are your workouts going to make on the quality of your work? In your case, in an emergency room, an environment where you have to be pretty sharp. I mean, you got to be able to. Yeah.
Last thing I want is my doctor to come to me like, I just bonked so
I
hard
just
out
had
there.
a huge day.
My workout just trashed me. So just bear with me.
Yeah. He's like, hand me some forceps. That's a scalpel. I don't know. Don't care.
Yeah. So ideally, do your workout, go do your day of work, and then have a full recovery so that you can reap all the benefits of the training you did. But again, you got to balance that with, how effective are you at work following some of these workouts, or how good are those workouts at the end of a long day at work? Certain workouts you can get away with. You come home dog tired, but you can make yourself get on that bike and you can work for an hour at 70% of threshold, and you can get that aerobic ride in. Okay, great. Can you get on the bike and do quality VO2 max work? Can you hit those targets? Can you sustain that target level for the prescribed durations?
It's tough.
It's a tough one.
I would have to think that, in a very, I could sense somebody feeling bad for doing all of that work than just taking a rest day after a really busy work schedule, but you shouldn't feel bad about that. Like it's, remember that you should only train as much as your body, you should only heap stress on, or as much stress onto your body as you can absorb, right? And if your body isn't in a place to be able to absorb stress, there's not much point in heaping it on at that point. You have to make sure that you're recovered. And
that's a lesson I need to learn.
I keep seeing that on your workouts.
I know.
Yep, I'm tired.
That was a horrible workout. And the next day, maybe the 20 hours, whatever, was enough.
It's a tough spiral.
It is.
You get good fitness. Like I've said before, you want to ride that wave. And
here's a question, guys. Can I have a question for you two?
Yeah, and
you want to finish this one first?
Yeah, just one thing really quick on this, then we'll go into that. I also don't want people to think that just because you don't work, on your feet in a busy ER situation, you could very well have a desk job, but that desk job is extremely stressful.
Oh yeah.
And that the emotional stress that you're putting on yourself and the psychological toll that your job takes.
Is it Alex Hutchinson? He's the writer. I mean, there's like 3 different Hutchinsons. I think Alex Hutchinson is the one that just wrote Endure. He's written a number of books we've read.
Okay.
But he talks about exactly that. The effect mental stress can have on your physiological capabilities, your physical capabilities.
The emotional stress working for me, guys, has to be insane.
Right?
We have a room just meant for crying. That's what the podcast room actually. That's why it's like. That's why it has the sound dampening on it. Nate yelled at me once again.
It's kind of, but if you're a person that doesn't work this type of stereotypically stressful, appearing scenario, that doesn't mean that you aren't, that just because you're sitting down doesn't mean you're recovering, is what I'm getting at.
Yeah. And you don't have to be an ER physician for your job to qualify as a taxing one.
Totally.
There are office days where everything at TrainerRoad just goes bam, bam, bam. I just get good news after good news, and you're dancing. And then just like the people on the climb in the Troy, California, you get in your workout, and it's good. Yeah. And there's other days where a third-party credit card processor went down, and you can't get sign-ups, and you got to work around something, and then you're getting the bike. And sometimes it goes well, but other times it's you're not as sharp.
Stress comes at you from all sides.
Yep. Mm-hmm. Okay, here's my question.
Ready.
I think hopefully I'm not the only one with this question. Let's say you have a C race that you really want to do, fun mountain bike race, but you're coming into it tired. Should you?
Like tonight.
Sounds like tonight for me. Yeah. Should you skip the race, or I can get the benefit of the skills? It's like a fun race. Like I really have
social thing too.
Exactly. Yeah. And I don't think you can just be like, well, just take it at 70%. That doesn't happen like in the race, because really I'll just ride by. Everyone will just go, and I'll be like, oh, I'll sit here.
And what's the point of being there anyway if you're not going to race?
Right.
Yeah.
So go to race. I would just look at a slightly bigger picture. Just look a couple days out. Are you carrying a bunch of fatigue into this, or just a little bit of fatigue? Do you have any time to recover afterwards? Do you have big workouts locked and loaded post this race? Just widen the lens a little bit and see what's coming. But doing a race slightly tired, why not? I mean, I do tons of workouts slightly tired. We as athletes do that all the time.
What about pretty tired?
Well, and that's for you to determine. I mean, can you do this? And maybe this is something you can't determine until a couple weeks pass right now. You do it and you look back and you see the sort of impact it had on your subsequent training and racing.
What's your weekend look like for your training? Like what's in the near future?
Well, we have a 3-day weekend here.
Yeah, so are you going, there's a really physically hard mountain bike race on Saturday.
I wasn't going to do that.
Okay.
So I was going to skip that no matter what, and I was going to do Friday off, and then if I feel good, Saturday TT bike workout, Sunday, and then probably Sunday hard workout, probably Monday off because Tuesday we have a road race.
That's right, we do, don't
and
we?
it's in the evening, so that effectively gives you as
day
much
and a half.
as 48, even 60 hours of recovery, depending.
I was planning a Le Mans loop for Monday. So
right before the race.
yeah.
Okay.
Or low consequence race. I'm not
so pretty much
or anything.
I can just try it, but just know I could skip the whole weekend if I really.
Yeah, I think when you get to that point, you'll know it. It won't be, I'm pretty tired. Should I do this? It'll be, I am very tired. I'm not doing this.
Okay.
Yeah.
And there are two things that I would add to that is, number one, your race is probably going to be a half hour long. It's going to be short.
Oh, really?
Yep.
I can do a half hour.
Long. So a half hour is not like a ton of stress.
You can't put yourself you can't damage yourself.
You can only do so much harm in a half hour.
Although it can hurt a ton.
Totally.
I can't only do so much harm.
Yeah.
And then the second part that I would say is, I don't think this is your situation right now, but just because if you go into a small race like this and you really expect to win, and not winning would really upset the apple cart, so to speak, like psychologically speaking. If you show up to a race and you are results dependent or seeking a result and you're just really tired, then in some cases there's some psychological trauma.
That's a dangerous
that
perspective to adopt, though. I mean, you're setting yourself up for failure. That's like that's a pass or fail sort of situation. I either get everything right or I'm unhappy with it.
And I think that since this is a C race, it's a great example of you shouldn't be looking for I need to finish, I need to win this time, or I need to win this race, that sort of a thing.
I'm pretty good at not winning, but the thing that does get me is if I do really well, like power output for workouts and training, and then in race day I don't align myself up. And this is a C race, so it's a little bit different. But let's say you're doing really well in training, indoor and outdoor, you're hitting your power numbers, and on race day you don't hit your power numbers by a significant amount.
That's what messes with you.
And it's usually because I look back and I'm like, my taper was bad. I changed something eating. I paced wrong. That's the part that gets me, and I'm like,
But it's a training race. I mean, that's the time to make those mistakes and figure out what not to do next time.
Yep, exactly right. And that's the operative principle is whatever your goal is with this event, is it one that you can realistically achieve right now? And it's good to have, for C races, it's going to be very different than your A race.
Well, I think your goals are perfect for something like tonight. You want to go out and basically work on skills and also get a decent short workout in.
Yep.
Yeah. So cool.
You can accomplish
As your coach, I would say, do it.
Thanks, Chad.
Do it, Nate.
Thank you.
Next one's from Chris. He says, it's a two-part question. He says, I'm a 200-pound rider at about 3.8 watts per kilogram, racing 3-hour gravel grinders. That's the usual races that he focuses on. That's it's just getting more and more common. There's so many gravel races all over. He says, am I riding right? This is his first question. He says, when I'm with a group, I feel like I'm always braking, and it kills me to do so because it takes more effort to get my momentum going again. The skinny guys in the bunch never seem to touch the levers, he says.
Oh, Chris, it's not just skinny
guys. I
guys.
don't think it has anything to do with the fact they're skinny.
Pete Morris, 210 pounds, or maybe he's 205 now.
Yep.
He never touches the brakes.
He's as smooth as they get.
There's what's the Cliff Bar episode where we talked about this?
Episode 23, I believe.
23.
We talk about, and that's the one where we go through and we touch on everything that you can think of in terms of how to be efficient in a group. But I think it behooves us to talk about a bit of that stuff right now.
Yeah.
And once again, I've brought this up plenty of times, but Chad, you're a great example of riding in a group and knowing how to be smooth.
I'm the opposite.
One tip.
You're getting there.
Well, and we're going to go over that actually in a bit. But one thing that when I was new at cycling, I was riding with a group, and they were all 60, 70-year-old guys. They're called the procrastinating pedalers.
Me too. I rode with them first.
Yeah, that's the first kind of group that I just jumped in with. And I was this young guy, and they just fill you with advice the whole time and guidance and correction. And one of the things that they helped me with very early on was to quit watching wheels. So when you're behind somebody, quit watching wheels and actually look up towards shoulders, right? And that did a number of things. First of all, whenever you watch a wheel, it's it's just like when you're riding a mountain bike or skiing or doing anything like that, or driving on the road. And if you're trying to hold yourself in the lane by watching every dotted line pass and see where you're at in relation to that dotted line.
Too myopic. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. You'll be, it's like mowing a lawn. Instead of just looking straight ahead when you mow the lawn, you're looking down to make sure you follow that tire mark. You're going to be crooked, right?
It's just like coming through a turn. If you're looking directly in front of you through a turn, it's way harder to manage that turn than it is if you look far through the turn.
Yeah, and so that'll help you smooth out. It'll make things less stressful. Your anxiety will drop when you're riding in a group. It'll really help. You'll also find that you naturally find a comfortable position, and you'll get more comfortable even riding very close and not looking at that wheel, because you'll kind of build up this sense of awareness for where you're at. But the big thing that really helps with is when you're talking about braking in a group, you'll see when people are slowing down, when obstacles are coming up, when you're looking up that road.
You got to be looking many riders ahead of you. I mean, you don't have to, you can look way ahead of you. I mean, if you're in a big field and you're 60 riders back, you can watch the front of the field. I mean, you can peek your head up and see what's going on up there and anticipate what's going to come through that field. If they're slowing for a turn, if you see the field split for whatever reason, or something happens farther up, it's going to trickle back to you, and it's probably going to be magnified by the time it gets back to you. So that anticipatory riding is hugely important.
Yeah.
Probably my second worst road crash was doing that as I was looking up, trying to do this, and then someone just in the middle went real hard, and my wheel
cut over sideways.
Yeah, my wheel, because if you're not watching your wheel, it's hard to tell when you're 1 centimeter, 2 centimeters overlapped.
Yeah.
You have to be
first,
mentally very sharp. I mean, you have to take in the big picture and the small picture all at once, all the time. It sounds crazy complex because it is. It just so happens our brains work very fast so we can do this, but it is acquired. I mean, learning how to shift your focus to the larger picture and then back down to the larger and back down, being aware of both of them all the time.
One thing I would say is I don't like the saying watch your wheel. I like the saying mind your wheel. And it seems like semantics, but it's just because, like Chad said, you should be taking it into account more than just actually looking at your wheel. Mm-hmm. And I find a lot of people that are so concerned with overlapping their front wheel that's all they look at, and then they end up just fighting with that specific thing of overlapping their wheel the whole time, and they miss the big picture of being smooth, staying with a group, being able to be efficient. I find that if you can ride with people that you really trust and ride behind them, you'll start to get an exact feel for where your front wheel is, and you'll know when you've gone too far. Yeah. It's like I never look at where my tire is in relation to the person in front of me, but I don't overlap. And it's because I've kind of built up that awareness of where that is.
Yeah, and then when it comes to braking specifically, 2 bits of advice for you, Chris. Learn to feather the brakes and learn not to use the brakes. So
what do you do? What
both
do you mean
of which
by that?
are applicable. So feathering, I mean, if you're braking and you're scrubbing off a ton of speed at once, not only is it unsafe and it compromises control, but it's unnecessary. Mm-hmm. You can feather the brakes, so lightly on the brakes for a brief period of time and not a heavy pull. So just scrub off a little bit of speed. Get used to, if someone slows in front of you, it doesn't mean you have to mash on the brakes and correct that situation all at once. You can give a little bit of braking and then swing slightly outside of the line. Mm-hmm. And that's the non-braking part of it, because you don't necessarily have to use the brakes a lot of the time. Changes on the terrain, maybe on a gravel race, it's going to be a bit different, but on the road, if you just duck back into the wind, that can be all the reduction in speed that you need. That change in your aerodynamics. I mean, putting that big sail in the wind, using that to scrub off speed means you just coast and sit out in the wind for a second.
But it's like less braking, right? Because it's not the same effect. So you slow down a little bit, then you get in and you're at the same speed.
Both of these are subtler effects, and you have to get comfortable with that. And that ties in with the whole anticipatory riding. Looking ahead and knowing what's coming so that you don't have to grab a handful of brake. You see it coming, so you maybe feather a little bit. It trickles back, you feather a little more. By the time it gets to you, you feather a little more, and all's right. Yeah,
something that when I'm in a group, my last resort is touching my brakes. My first resort, if I'm doing that, is going to be just drifting into that wind, and I use the wind as a brake.
If you can. And sometimes you have riders on both sides of you, and your movement is super limited. And obviously braking gets a little trickier in those situations. But when you're in a pace line, or you're lined up in a smaller group, and you have the luxury of being able to move out of the draft, it can be really effective.
The one thing I would say, though, when you move out of that draft is it doesn't have to be some dramatic, bam, lateral move. It's just something, it's gradual. And that's another thing that I see a lot of people kind of misunderstand is a lot of the time it's because when we really pay attention to group dynamics, it's in a sprint and we see guys do the very dramatic, I've done my pull and now I'm going to blow up off the side.
Yeah, and they get criticized for how dangerous that is too, though.
It's really dangerous and you shouldn't do that. When we're talking about getting into the wind, in fact, I even view it as when I go over to the left and the further into the wind I get, away from that rider, my braking is increasing. So many times I know that I don't need to go all the way into the wind. I just need to put my shoulder into the wind. Maybe.
Well, and then swinging out too. People have heard, and I've heard it plenty of times, you don't half wheel. It's dangerous to half wheel. When you overlap wheels, you're putting yourself in a position where someone can chop your wheel and you crash. You have to half wheel a lot, especially if you're in a big group. So get comfortable with that too. It is a precarious situation, but it doesn't mean that if you're half wheeling someone, you need to get on the brakes and get directly behind them, even if you're out of their draft. Half wheeling happens. It's going to happen. It's just not you don't live there.
Thank you
but
for
you're
going
to be there.
Thank you for saying that because I see it every pro race. Everybody is half wheeling in the peloton.
I know, and then unless it's a perfectly strung out pace line, and even then you're going to come up on that wheel like when we swing out into the wind and half wheel them for a short while and then duck back in.
And that's just it. Like a lot of the time, when you swing into that wind, you'll have momentum, but you don't brake because then that could cause problems behind you. You swing out, you might even get right up next to the rider for a bit. But then if you're coasting and the wind's taking care of slowing you down a little bit more, you'll just naturally fall back in. You'll start pedaling again and go right back in.
Just don't be the guy who sits there all the time.
And that's, because half wheeling and at least the context that a lot of people talk about half wheeling is when you intentionally sit offset to a person like that. And usually you're the person that are riding with somebody and you're just a half wheel ahead and it's kind of like a egging them on sort of a thing. And you do that when you're in a massive group of riders. Nobody's going to ride in uniform, grid lines and squares across the board. But the point is, and what I'm getting at here is the fact that it's fluid And the best thing that you can do is just focus on being smooth with that group. You don't need to use the brakes as much as you think, and you can actually just use that wind.
You also half wheel if there's wind from a crosswind. Because you echelon.
Yes.
And that's like...
An echelon is half wheeling.
Exactly, right.
That's the position you're in, a staggered position.
Exactly. I know, it's just weird. Everyone's like, don't,
and that's
protect
it.
your wheel, don't do that. And then...
That's just evidence that hard, fast rules typically don't stand up.
Yeah.
Could Chris also... Because sometimes in a big group, you get yo-yoing at the back.
Totally.
And it could be not his fault at all. He just... Everyone slows down, everyone speeds up. Could he's a strong rider at 3.8. Move up to the front.
Yeah.
Totally.
Your third or fourth, those yo-yos are so much smaller.
30th or 40th. I mean, depending on how big the field is. The farther up you get, the less that ripple effect will affect you as it trickles back.
Segonfondo.
Yeah.
We there was tons of that.
Yeah,
tons of that at the beginning when there was a big peloton of like 100 people.
And I was at the front and didn't experience any of it, right?
I was at
Whereas
the mid back of the peloton and lots of it. And that's where the crashes were too.
Yeah.
Probably because there was a yo-yo, right?
Sure.
Everyone hit the brakes. It was in a corner.
And and usually the smoother wheels, or in other words, the riders that are smoother, are generally, in most cases, they're going to be toward the front, not across the board, but you're going to have a greater probability at finding smoother riders up there toward the front in many cases. So a lot of it too is, maybe you just ride always behind one person, or you're in this race and you're behind one person, you just can't get a good rhythm. Sometimes you do find yourself, I know, Chad, I'm sure that you have too, where you're in a group like that and you do keep hitting the brakes because this person in front of you is just, constantly doing the herky-jerky yo-yo stuff.
Not for very long. I mean, anytime you get behind someone like that, you're super motivated to get away from them.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So if you do find yourself where you're using these tips and everything else, but you feel like it isn't working, find another wheel. Find another person that you feel like is going to be smoother. And then there are certain things, too, where you're just riding with a group that isn't going to be smooth, and maybe you can recognize some patterns. We've talked about with the Cliff Bar guys before, when they have turns that really do require the pack to slow down and then speed up again, that what they'll do is they'll actually sit off the back just a bit. They'll let a gap open up coming into the turn, and then they'll coast through with a greater speed. And then as a result, they don't have to worry as much about re-acceleration or braking. They can kind of smooth it out. So if you do know that the group you're with is a bit herky-jerky and there's not going to be a whole lot of changing that right now, you can kind of anticipate that in some circumstances to smooth things out. And everyone behind you will thank you as a result.
But that doesn't work if it's a fast turn.
Exactly.
Don't just gap yourself within.
Yeah. If they aren't slowing down at all, then that is a very bad idea.
Especially not 40 times a criterium.
Yeah. And then something that you mentioned too on this was, Nate, was pedaling softer. A lot of people, especially in race scenarios, think that it's like 600 watts or zero, right? Like there's no in between.
Especially his FTP is 342. So pedaling soft, he might be like, I'm at 300 watts. That is soft, but you might need to be at 200 watts or 180 watts.
It's a gradient, right?
Yeah.
Explore all forms.
Yeah, especially when he says the skinny guys never touch the levers. That makes me think that he's just pedaling so hard, right?
Off and on.
Yeah, off and on.
Yeah, I'm sure of it. His next question, he says, it's about a training plan. He says, as much as I want to think that my gravel grinders are a climbing road race, they have been feeling more like centuries with steep 15-minute climbs at 60 to 75 RPM. Ooh, that's some grinding stuff there. He says, looking back, I think I should have done something different after the sustained power build, or even just another 8 weeks of sustained power, and I assume in this case that he was following the climbing road race plan. He says, I'm good at pacing and I eat well. Is weight loss the only way to really get competitive in the mountains? And this is coming once again from a 200-pound rider, 3.8 watts per kilogram for people that want to
I want to mention one thing. We've said it so many times, but if you're doing at a 3.8 watts per kilo, like you should climb just as well as someone at 145 pounds at 3.8 watts per kilo.
Yep.
You should not be at 60 to 75 RPM because, like, for that race to be designed that way, people at 3 watts per kilo, which are going to be a lot of people, and there's going to be a lot of people at 2.8 and 2.5.
They're walking.
Yeah, they can't ride that.
Yeah.
It's
I'm
a
guessing,
pace for sure.
unless this is one of those crazy things that is on the internet of people, right? You more gearing, man. Like totally more gearing.
Yeah, swallow pride and put on gears always. And your move may not be, your gearing may not be a result of pride. It may just be what the bike has, right?
Yeah.
But a lot of riders, actively choose to go with, big chain ring, and they don't want to have a big cog on the back because it's a prideful thing, and that's so silly. No, embrace that and make yourself faster. That's the whole, give yourself a better chance of success. And if your races are having these steep climbs like this, then absolutely gear for that, because those are decisive moments in the sense that you're falling on the bad side of it. It sounds like those could be decisive moments where you fall on the good side of things.
So Chad, what plan should he have done?
I almost always break this down to how you're going to approach the event. If in the case of a gravel race, a lot of people just ride them and they want to do steady efforts and they treat it more like a century, and other people want to race them. So they let the dynamics of other riders or how the race takes shape dictate how they ride. And a lot of times that means some explosive riding, some hard efforts, and a wide variety of efforts too. So if you're going to race it, I almost always steer riders towards the road race plans, either the rolling or the sustained climb, or the sustain.
The climbing road race one.
Climbing road race.
Rolling
Yeah,
road race or climbing road race?
That's the one. Yeah.
Mexico brain.
Yeah. And then if you're just looking to maintain, pretty steady effort, then the 40K TT plan is a good way to go. Obviously, sustained power build, century plans, but stuff that don't really emphasize all those different types of efforts, all the more race-oriented types of efforts. I just steer riders that way. So just decide how you're going to approach it. Are you going to be a real even Steven sort of rider? Or are you going to be pretty dynamic and explosive and race the event?
And something that we should add on too. We're going to do Lost and Found, not this weekend, but next weekend, right? Mm-hmm. I think already. Jeez. Oof. And then Dirty Kansas the same weekend. Both gravel events, but they could not be further from each other, right? So like a lot of people
in terms of demands.
Yeah, in terms of demands. So a lot of people I feel like blanket gravel as being, gravel is just like a thing, but it's varied, and in fact it's much more varied even than road racing and everything else, because there's kind of no limits that are in place in terms of what terrain you can go on.
Some of them are full on mountain bike races and others are just country roads.
Yeah, and some of them are going to be even more climby than what you would find on a mountain bike race. It's really just it's a totally unique beast. So your gravel racing is not necessarily like you need a gravel plan, right? Like it's the varied demands. You should be looking to satisfy the demands of the race rather than the genre's name.
And how you're going to race it too.
Totally, yeah. Yes, and how you're going to race it.
So, segue, Lost and Found. Lost and Found. Remember last year when we did the 60 and we ended and we said that was the perfect distance?
Yes.
I am so glad we didn't do the 100.
Yeah.
And then this year we're signing up for the 100 only because we're going to do Leadville. Mm-hmm. And I am not prepared for – that's actually what I should do this weekend is some kind of long ride because –
join me on Monday.
Dude, I'm not doing the Le Mans Loop. For people who don't know, it's like 90 miles and how many feet of climbing?
It's like around 9,000 to 10,000 somewhere in there.
9,000 to 10,000, 90 miles with Jonathan. Yeah. Like,
that's a big day.
Great. Sounds like a great time to me.
With yourself, like happy and peppy the whole time as I'm like up every climb. Come on, Nate, let's do it.
It'll be a good time.
I don't know. It's going to be tough. This is like a...
No, I've done long rides over the past couple of weeks, specifically because of stuff like this. I know it's coming. Yeah. So I'm getting used to being in the saddle for 4 to 6 hours at a time. Doesn't mean I want to do 100 miles. I'd much rather do the 60-mile version.
How long will Lost and Found take?
I mean, it's not as rough as last year. So last year was really hard, like technically hard. The
6 hours?
Was rough. I bet that it'll take us around 6 hours this year. Yeah. It's me maybe longer, right?
Longer?
It's got a lot of pavement sections, but it's got a lot of pavement sections, and I'll be on a mountain bike.
Me too.
And you'll be on a mountain bike as well, but you'll have your skinny tires on there.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, and I'm running my mountain bike setup again because I'm just trying to run through things. I learned some stuff at the Segundo that I want to try. I've made changes now and I want to try.
What did you change and what did you learn?
Wax chains, I'm not doing them, man.
You didn't like the wax chain?
Nope.
What happened?
Nope. I've waxed that chain twice, and I have a theory with wax chains and mountain biking that I believe that the wax. So the cool part about wax chains is that the gravel and grit and everything else doesn't stick, right? Whereas with lube, it sticks. But the problem that I've found, and I looked at my chain yesterday, it was re-waxed, and then I did a long ride on Saturday, and it just turned into a noisy rattle trap by the end. But I did cross a lot of creeks and everything else too. But I looked at it, and the wax on the rollers and everything else, it was just chipped right off. So the wax was on in different spots. It may have been inside the pins, but it was chipped right off on the rollers. So it just made the thing an absolute noise trap. And when I spun my cranks like this, the cranks would just go like halfway around. And then once I cleaned the chain off thoroughly and then I lubed it, crank spin like 4 times at the same effort.
Neither of you guys should use wax change, especially for the TT.
Yeah.
Because I think Jonathan's 100% right.
So I don't buy that it's effective for mountain biking.
That you didn't strip the chain properly the first time? Because I didn't do that once and I got that same experience.
No, so I mean it was.
Or did that once?
It was stripped pretty well, and then the second time after I did 6 baths with it.
Well, if it's been waxed once, you have to boil the chain in order to strip it again. You can't strip it.
I don't think that was the case though, because there are other people that have been using it, and I've asked them, they're having the same experience. So I don't think that it's not what I'm going to run. At the very least, I'm not going to run it because it becomes a noisy rattle trap after you go through creeks and everything else, and it's just terrible. So I think that mine was fine until about the last 10, 15 miles of Segundo, and then it just became a cacophony. It was terrible. So
I had no problems. It's
Yeah.
quiet as can be the whole time.
Me too.
maybe you guys just didn't charge through the creeks hard enough. So, and then the other thing that I changed is I actually changed the position of my handlebar, and then I also changed the position of my saddle slightly on the bike. So,
why did you change the position of your handlebar?
Because I have my bars rolled in a position where it was actually providing less wrist relief, but it was giving me a bit more of an aggressive lower position. And now I've actually rolled my bars back up a bit so that it gives me more wrist relief.
So you're getting wrist like pain?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So just doing little things like that.
That's a good tip. Like
Totally.
You can, because you have that works because they're not a straight bar, it's got a rise to it, right?
No, it's technically a flat bar. However, every flat bar has a certain element of rise and a certain element of sweep. And sweep is how it bends back to you. So where you rotate that bar means that it's going to have a different angle to it when it sweeps backwards. So
and does the little changes make a big? This is one of those things like saddles, like
totally make a huge difference. So
learn something new.
Yeah. So that's what I'm doing for Lost and Found, because I want to shake these things down before Leadville, and they're really stuff that you don't figure out until you're a long way into a ride.
The other tip that I have is my as you can tell looking at the podcast, my weightlifting has not been consistent.
Okay.
And we're talking about tired upper back.
Mm-hmm.
Recently, I just did a longish 50 some miles, not long enough for Lost and Found, but I want to do like a 70 or something. But anyways, deadlifts, when I do deadlifts consistently and I get the weight back up, my back's not tired while I ride.
You're balancing things out. I mean, everything we do is quad dominant. We don't even use our hips all that much. So when you actually start to balance things back out, it just makes for just a stronger body.
I've just noticed that we have a video on that on YouTube.
We do.
Go to youtube.com/TrainerRoad.
It's probably something in my brain brought up because that. But I mean, really, so many times I've had back problems, and if I once it stops hurting, I do deadlifts, and then I feel great. Yeah. And then I feel great, and I go, I don't need to do deadlifts. Yeah. And then 3 or 4 months later, I'm like, oh, my back hurts. I need to do them again. Yeah. Then I try to lift some weight, and you start over from the beginning.
It's like anything else; it has to be maintained. Yeah. You got to stay on top of it.
Yeah, I'll be right back.
So if anybody's going to race Lost and Found, you can find us there. It's going to be tons of fun.
Yeah, come say hi.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm looking forward to it.
You'll have plenty of opportunities.
Yeah.
If you're really strong, ride right in front of me.
Yeah.
Because there's going to be a lot of drafting, we think.
One tip on this race, it's going to start extremely hard like it did last year because it starts the same way. It's going to start on a big climb. It is a long day. So once again, don't go crazy in the beginning. It's going to hurt you later
That's what I was going to say. And this is like Leadville too, is there's a big climb and then a descent, and then it's kind of flattish for a while. But part of me is like, well, you want to be in that flattish group.
Because it's fast.
Yeah, and you're going to save so much energy than being by yourself or being with people that aren't at the same speed as you, other people that went really hard and they want to be in your group. Yeah. Right, you're leading the group. Or to not really, which should you hit at the first climb hard to be in the fast group or not?
Yeah, I've noticed now, I've done enough of these to see that just a small decrement in how hard I work doesn't have a huge impact on time, but it has a big impact on how much I enjoy my day. So for instance, at the Segundo, you finished 20, 30 minutes ahead of me?
Maybe
20?
More.
No, it wasn't that much. And you worked for it, whereas I really enjoyed my day. It's not to say I didn't do work, but I had a pretty good day.
And bacon.
I enjoyed my day too.
Did you?
Mm-hmm. I did. Okay. I had the cramping, so I actually couldn't go as deep as I wanted to, but it was fun.
But my point is simply that it doesn't take much to make it a far more tolerable experience and an enjoyable one.
Maybe what we should do is we should rally the troops right now, all of you listening and watching. if you're going to do Lost and Found, which of course all of you are going to do Lost and Found, you can just go with us. And the way that we solve your problem is we just make a good group that starts.
Yeah, we need like a 4 watt per kilo kind of around 3.5 to like 4.4
Come
group.
on.
Yeah, where we all get like, that's a pretty big range. We all
Just keep
we
it
all
right
climb
around 4
together
watts.
Yeah.
and then we just pace line it like the whole rest of the way.
Yeah.
Decent. That would be awesome.
All for it. So if you're looking for a good group, join us. Let's get back into it with Shafwan's question. I hope that's how you say your name. I apologize if I'm mispronouncing it. It says, hi, TrainerRoad coaches. Absolutely love the app and the podcast. Many thanks. And 5 stars. Sweet. Thank you. You can leave those reviews, by the way, on iTunes.
We haven't been begging for those for a long time.
No, I think we're over 1,000. No. Yeah, maybe over 1,000 reviews now. I don't know. But we're at 5 stars. So if you feel like we don't deserve 5 stars, just let us know what we can do to be better.
Yeah.
And then we'll make it better. Then you can give us 5 stars.
Yes.
So he says, I recently started cycling and love the structure of your programs. I have completed Sweet Spot Base 1 and 2 and seen an increase of FTP of 45%. Nice, man.
That is amazing.
He says, although still only at 2.6 watts per kilogram, so plenty of room for improvement.
That's a big point because people are going to hear this.
Yep.
Is when you start a little lower, which I was like that too, 45% increase will happen.
Yep.
And then it will just get, sadly, less and less and less. You can't do, you do a few more 45s in a row and you're at that 500 watt FTP increase. So, or 500 watts FTP.
So Shafwan says, as a Muslim, I will be fasting for a month in Ramadan starting next week. So that's actually, it's already started. This is just a delayed question a bit. He says, this consists of no food or water from sunrise or sunset, which in the UK will be about 18 hours per day. I don't want to lose the fitness I have worked so hard to gain, so what do you suggest to maintain this? He says, I was planning to complete short 30 to 45-minute sessions 3 times a week, completing my workouts just before sunset, allowing me to eat straight after. He says, have you any suggestions on the workouts to select to do enough to maintain fitness for a month? And then he says, also after the month, would you suggest reassessing your FTP and continuing on to a build phase, or should I go back to base for a few weeks to rebuild?
Okay.
He says no specific events that he's training for.
Let's back up. What was first question there?
Yeah, there's a lot of them. Let's go to this one right here where he says so his plan is to fast for those 18 hours and then train and then eat right after.
Yeah. So but only 30 to 45 minutes.
Yeah, Shafwan, you're talking about a 6-hour eating window, which isn't the worst thing. Basically, you're maybe not even skipping all 2 meals. You could even pack a couple meals in that pretty narrow window, but it still leaves you plenty of time to eat and replenish. And that's what you've suggested doing. You're going to do the hard workout, and then you're going to replenish afterwards. Give your body the materials it needs to benefit from that workout. I think your approach is perfect. There's not really anything I would change. You're doing 3 times a week, which is definitely going to be enough to maintain the fitness you've built, perhaps even build a little more fitness. That's not out of the question. And you're nourishing at an appropriate time.
Totally. So that's exactly what I would recommend.
What would be some workouts, like short VO2 max?
Yeah, if he's got 30, 45 minutes, I sound like just all I ever recommend is VO2 max work, but because in situations like this, that's what works best.
Yeah. So I'd go onto our website and just click on the VO2 max and the 30 minutes time frame.
You'll find a ton of them because a lot of the workouts, so we've been building up variants of these workouts so that you can have ones that are basically like the VO2 max workouts that you would do that would be 60 minutes, 90 minutes, something like that.
Same workouts, just trimmed down, less sets, less intervals, but
so you can find
same
a lot
structure.
45-minute variations of them.
By the way, product update, on the website, our workout page has been redone, and if you go to the bottom, it's very easy to see all the workout variants.
So cool.
And then in the app, I believe it's I think it's in beta now, and it's going to be released to everyone in a couple weeks, is in the app right then. So sometimes you look into a workout and you say, here's Carson. And you're like, but I want to do a little less or a little more that day. If you scroll down to the bottom, there's workout variants, and you can see the plus and minus versions right there without having to go back. And it's super easy to navigate between them, see them all at once. So that's out now.
And then actually, before we move past this one, I want to get clear, dispel the misunderstanding that you're going into these in a fasted state. You may not have eaten, but that doesn't necessarily mean your muscles are going to be glycogen depleted. So the fact is, you probably have all the fuel on board that you need, and when you do your workout and then you follow it with 1 or 2 meals over that 6-hour window, how often you're going to eat, maybe just one time, you'll very probably replenish enough of those stores to be able to do your next workout.
He didn't have, we're assuming he didn't have a big glycolytic day, right? Where
exactly. So
maybe if he's a UPS person delivering boxes all day and he's got to pick up heavy things, and that would be something different.
Run them down a bit, but you're probably still going to have some on board, and then you're going to refill some of the loss, or undo some of that loss over the course of that meal. And then you're staggering these. I'm assuming 3 times a week means you're going to do day on, day off. So that day off is yet another opportunity to replenish some of that depletion.
Yeah, I could see that for sure. Cool, good stuff. Martin's question. Ready to move on to that one?
Yes, I was going to do another product update.
Oh, okay.
Okay,
yeah, which one?
I forgot. We should have. We're going to start telling everyone these because all these things happen and we don't tell them on our podcast.
That's right.
Sorry, big segue. Workout text sounds. You've been asking them for a long time now. Is sometimes Chad writes all this great text, and sometimes there'll be a gap between it.
Sometimes a long gap.
Yeah, right.
Depending
sometimes
on
it's like for an interval or a rest period, you may not get it for another 4 minutes, and
there could be a 10-minute stretch on some of those longer workouts where the intervals are 15 minutes of riding at 65%. I may insert text for the first minute or so, and then there's 9 minutes of nothing.
Yep. Yeah, sometimes you even say, I'm going to kindly leave you to just be you for a while.
Try to give people a heads up so they know when to expect the next round of text.
Yeah.
So what would happen is that someone would be watching a movie or something, and then you look down, you'd be like, there'd be a middle of a sentence, and you're like, well, I don't know if I missed a whole bunch of instruction or something. So now we have, if there hasn't been text on screen for, I believe, 10 seconds, which Chad usually too, he writes them where they're all grouped, and then there'll be a gap, is that it plays this little non-invasive sound, but it's different enough that you can hear it and see it. And again, I think that's talk to a product manager, I think it's in beta now, and will be out with the workout variants, is that you get this nice sound, and I've been using it, and it's actually very, very helpful.
Awesome.
So
yep.
I miss less text. Actually, I don't miss any text because I can hear it, and I just look down.
Very cool.
Awesome. So Martin's question, he says, great podcast, long-time listener. I've always got many practical takeaways from your work. Keep it up. And so he says, my question is, I've started cranking up my training. I've been doing 400, 500, or 600 TSS weeks for a while, with recovery weeks in obviously too, and I'm seeing good results. However, my weight is starting to creep up. So even though my FTP is going up, my watts per kilogram is staying static or decreasing, which is really frustrating as I have some very hilly rides coming up. You and us both, in this case, Martin.
It's super frustrating.
He says, I've always been very aware of what I eat and have been restricting calories for a while, trying to shed weight before the training load started to increase. I'm eating a bit more in line with the training load, and I'm not getting ill from the extra training. So, he says, I know I'm eating enough to sustain myself, he says. However, I also know I am not going totally mad with extra food, and I'm still quite restrained in what I eat. I've heard that people who have restricted calories over a long time can start to put on weight as their metabolism is slowed down and their bodies then hoard fat as a result. So he's, I guess, assuming, am I in this cycle? And if so, what do I do to break that? I guess, do you want to go from here, Chad?
So we can cover the science, or we can cover the anecdote. I don't know which order you guys prefer to do it in. If you want to dive into your...
Let's talk about the anecdote, because he talked about that whole problem where your body starts to hoard fat as a result.
Yeah, so let's dispense with that immediately. Your body doesn't hoard fat. That's not how it works. It's you can slow your metabolism, you can blunt your insulin response, and I think that might be what he's talking about, but it's not quite as simple as that. So I don't want to think that your body is desperately clinging to the fat. With you as an endurance athlete, that's pretty unlikely. Not entirely out of the question, though. We can talk about that in a bit.
Yeah, that's a really common thing that you hear people say, that's the assumption.
Go into starvation mode and the body clings to fat and all that stuff. It's not quite that simple.
Dang, logic isn't always right, huh?
The notes were changed, but there was something where
I didn't change any notes. I just added on notes below. Your guys' notes should still be there, and the Biggest Loser thing is at the very bottom if that's what you're looking for.
Yeah, what I'm looking for is the Biggest Loser people. They looked at a study on the weight loss and weight gain after Biggest Loser, and they started at 320, they dropped to 200, and then I forget how long after that was, but it was
You're looking for the
a couple
link?
years. It was they went back to 290 pounds.
Yeah.
But the point of this takeaway is, and please, if you see in the notes, let me know, is that their resting metabolic rate went down.
Took a hit.
Yeah, took a big hit.
That's how it works.
It was like a 500 to 700 calorie difference, I believe.
So resting metabolic rate, what is that, Chad? Just a basic overview.
So, okay, let's dive in then.
Yeah, because I think that's something that maybe not everybody understands. Just that term itself of resting metabolic rate. What's that referring to?
So the question is
from Martin. So from Martin, from this perspective, what Martin's got going on is we're wondering, or I guess you're talking about the Biggest Loser side of things, Nate. So let's cover that. And what you talked about when the resting metabolic rate dropped down, that's basically like the basic amount of calories that need to be burned to keep you going.
I'll detail that right now. So he's asking for, how long does his how quickly can his metabolism feel the impact of this caloric restriction, and then how long do those impacts last? That's basically it, right?
Yep.
Okay. So according to Rosenbaum, 2008 study, and there's plenty of other science that fully agrees with this, almost immediately, and it persists indefinitely. As long as the caloric restriction is there, you're gonna suffer the consequences of it. So you can't continue to starve yourself and not expect your body to respond. It's really as simple as that. We strive for homeostasis in everything we do. I mean, that's like the nature of what we do with interval training. We disrupt that homeostasis. By training hard, we expect an adaptive effect. We get stronger. Our body has reestablished homeostasis at a higher work capacity. That's the nature of training, right? That's what we do. Diet's the same way. Every system in the body is the same way. It's constantly striving for homeostasis, and energy balance falls right in line with that. So if you affect that energy balance on one side of it, whether how much you put in, how much comes out, the body's going to find some way to compensate. That homeostasis will always be achieved in one manner.
Yeah, the body's clever.
Overall. Yeah. So he's concerned with his basal metabolic rate. And that's basically, all the systems of your body that are responsible for generating body heat, your cardiac function, keeping your blood pumping, how much blood is pumped, how strong the heart pumps, what sort of blood pressure it maintains, your brain metabolism. I mean, your brain itself is a glucose hog. Most of what is in your liver is there for your brain's activity.
How much muscle you carry.
The amount of muscle that's on your body, just all the systems, all the things that your body does that you're not really aware of, that's your basal metabolic rate.
Yep.
So this is the base rate of just to keep your body functioning, how many calories you burn.
And side note, we went and tested this, and you can get it tested. I believe, Jonathan, you were 1,800?
1,800.
And I was 2,200, and I think you were 2,200, 2,100, right? Chad and I are just the same.
Yeah,
person.
we're
pretty much
similar in so many ways, yeah.
Yep.
So all these things, and I just feel like mentioning this because it's kind of fun, but another thing that actually burns calories or is part of your basal metabolic rate is fat production. So actually storing calories as body fat requires calories. So, I mean, your body uses calories.
It's amazing.
in so many ways, outside of exercise. So let's not lose sight of that. Most of what we do in a day, most of the calories that we expend are in line with these functions.
Yep.
Exercise is just something we heap on top of it.
The body's working hard when it's
so when you combine your basal metabolic rate and then a few other things, the thermogenic effect of food, the non-exercise calories you burn, so just walking, doing your job, etc. Excess post-exercise oxygen consumption. There's another uptick that will burn a few more calories. All these things combine to form your total energy expenditure. So how much energy you're putting out.
Yep.
You have to balance that with how much energy you're putting in, otherwise there'll be a change. So if you're burning more calories, or if you're exceeding your total energy expenditure, or if that exceeds your intake, you're going to lose weight.
Yep.
May or may not be desirable. Losing weight doesn't mean you're losing fat. You can lose weight in a whole number of ways. It can be total body water. It can be fat stores, which is what most of us are after. It can be the water that's packed in with glycogen. It can be muscle mass. It can be anything.
All of that will affect your ability to train effectively, where you want to be able to train.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's what people are chasing. They just look at the scale. They just look at the weight loss, and they're not considering the consequence of the rest of it. They're not considering where that weight comes from. And it's really easy to lose sight of what we're actually after, which is, in our cases, performance improvement. And that's something that's hard to come by when we're effectively starving ourselves while we're asking more of it.
Which is a super common approach. Like the majority of folks, it seems like, they look at it, they're like, all right, here's my basal metabolic rate, here's what I've done, and they take a really aggressive chop.
Yeah, so all that does is makes the body reassign resources or redirect them. So it's coming out of your basal rate. Certain things that your body was doing, it won't do anymore because it doesn't have the resources to do it. And then we pile exercise on top of it, making it even more even more challenging. And it's a form of overtraining. Anytime you don't give yourself enough nourishment to fuel the training you're doing, you're effectively doing more training than your body is capable or has the resources to shoulder.
Yeah.
Two things. First, I'm going to go to Popeyes after this. Two, and what Rosenbaum said is that if you do that negative calorie, your basal metabolic rate is going to change.
It can plummet.
Right?
And that's another thing I don't think they give enough credit to the fact that basal metabolic rate is something we can affect by a lot. I'm talking like 40, 50%. So you can take a 2,200 calorie basal metabolic rate that Nate and I, actually saw that we had at that time, and we can do things, starve ourselves or whatever, and had plenty of experience with that last year, unfortunately. And you can cut that in half that very day.
Yeah,
I mean, it's an immediate impact.
You can do it in a day.
Yeah,
that's crazy.
It's drastically quick, and if you maintain that deficit, that caloric deficit, it just your energy falls, your body heat falls, your cardiac output falls. All of these things suffer.
It makes sense evolution-wise of like your body had less food, and now your body's now going to conserve so it doesn't do it.
Exactly that, because there are a couple fun things. Like in Jason Fung's Obesity Code, I reference this a lot because it's a super good resource. It brings a lot of these things together in a single book. He talks about over 200 weeks. We always strive for that 500 calorie deficit because we think 500 calories over 7 days is 3,500 calories. A pound of fat's about that. I'll lose a pound of fat if I just trim my diet by 500 calories. Right. If we were to do that daily, starting at 200 pounds, we would lose a pound a day for 200 days and waste away to 0 pounds. Obviously, the body doesn't work that way. So it's that same idea. And if we were to expend 3,000 calories but only take in 1,500 calories, we can't continue to do that because eventually it will die.
Yeah, we'll cease to exist.
The math isn't that simple.
This is my non-scientific thought.
Okay.
I wonder if it's on the opposite side too, where I have experiences when you do start training a bunch, but then you also fuel a bunch. If those extra resources don't go to adapting to training.
Well, that's it. You can modify your basal metabolic rate with restriction. It can plummet. You can also elevate it with more food. And that's not to say eat anything, eat a bunch, and you're going to get faster.
Don't go to
Popeyes. It has to be the right food. And
I'll get the 2-piece meal instead of the 5-piece.
Yeah, but what it comes down to, and I don't want to jump ahead, but it's hormonal influence. It's not just get a deficit, you'll lose weight, you'll get faster, performance will improve. It does not work that way.
So what sort of reduction is, I guess, kind of the reduction that people should be
It's not really a reduction.
For?
It's about eating better quality food. Yeah. And not starving yourself and not sending these mixed signals. And this is something I started to dive into, and I realized this was becoming maybe too much of a deep dive, and I kind of want to...
People love it, Chad.
I kind of want to feel out if this is something people do want to hear more about, and I will...
Nutrition and weight loss?
Yes. It's just such a complex topic, and it's a contentious one, too, and I don't...
That's right. It is very contentious.
I want to have my information in line before we dive into that. I do have more on this matter.
Please.
So people look at exercise as a mechanism for weight loss, and I'm going to say it. Exercise is not a good mechanism for weight loss. It's excellent for creating caloric deficit, but the way your body responds to caloric deficits is not favorable, especially in light of the performance adaptations we're seeking. So again, it comes back to diet. If you want to lose weight, you do it through diet and not caloric restriction, but a better quality diet. Nate's seen this in action. I mean, he shifted his diet from high glycemic, easily absorbable types of food that spiked his insulin, probably increased his insulin insensitivity, which means, we can go into insulin next time if we want to, but you basically get really crappy at burning fat. So you're doing a bunch of work, but the fat's not going anywhere. Well, it's because you're giving your system the energy it needs in a more easily accessible manner, which when it comes to these high glycemic foods, dump a bunch of blood glucose into the system, a bunch of insulin is released. Insulin shuts off fat metabolism. All these things boil down to what you're eating, the quality of your diet.
But while I work out, I do want the high glycemic stuff.
Absolutely, yeah.
But just not the rest of the day.
Again, we're chasing fitness adaptation, and then we're asking our bodies to do all this extra work and giving them less calories. It doesn't take a genius to figure out what's wrong with that.
Yeah, it's about proper fueling, with quality nutrients at the right times and making sure that that's in place.
So what I've seen, especially with lifting weights, but with and cycling more, is you can get super hungry if you get behind like behind the 8 ball.
See, that's another downside of caloric restriction is it just spurs hunger. So these
you
hormones
binge.
that make us hungry, and you can only deal with them for so long before you crack.
Yep.
And that's what people do. They restrict their calories. They get that initial weight loss, but then their BMR comes down too. And the weight loss plateaus. So what do but restrict calories further? Basal metabolic falls even farther, and it's just this downward spiral. All the while, hunger is just ramping up. Mm-hmm. Your body's shutting down in other ways, so your health is just going down. Mm-hmm. And this awful cycle ensues, and people just yo-yo. And what's a bummer about it is in the process, they've down adjusted their metabolism so that when they do finally crack and return to their original dietary intake, it's way more food than their body needs at that time. So they not only gain the weight back, but they don't have the basal rate to keep up with that old diet or that old caloric intake. So they probably end up fatter than they started.
So Martin sounds like he's on the other side. If he's bumping up and he's doing 400, 500, 600 TSS weeks, and he's complaining that he's getting some
probably fat
weight increase, and that's what I mean. That's what I was talking about, where you start to do these bigger weeks, and then you can get in this situation that if you aren't eating, this is my experience. If I do those bigger weeks and I try to like quote lose weight, I go back and forth with it so much because our events change. That later in the day, I will want to binge. Like, you know what I mean? Like it's just too much. But if I eat a whole bunch of like carrots and oatmeal and bell peppers and stuff like that, you don't get behind the 8 ball where you get that binge thing. And it's much easier later in the day to make the choice of brown rice and beans than a McDonald's Big Mac, both of which I had in the same day last week.
Yeah. Well, I've got some closing points that will address that.
Something I want to address along those lines is how good pro riders are at eating in terms of when they eat and what they're eating.
Well, once you've got the right components of your diet, once you're eating the right foods, you become very in tune with what you need and when you need it.
Yeah.
And pro athletes are awesome demonstrations of that.
Yeah, like when we pre-rode the Segundo course, before we even stopped, before you had unclipped a pedal, every time that we stopped, because we stopped a fair amount, we had a group of varying abilities and everything else. Jeff Kabush and Katarina Nash already had their goos or their Cliff Blocks or whatever else already in their mouth, and they were already, taking in food there. And what I noticed is that pro athletes eat more on the bike than we do by far. And in many cases, they don't eat quite as much as we do off the bike because we starve ourselves and we binge like crazy and we're going through this crazy cycle, whereas they know we need a specific type of food and we need it pretty regularly when we're on this bike because we're doing work. And then when I'm off the bike, I don't need to go crazy. I just need to bring in good quality stuff. I need to time it with the training, that sort of stuff. So it's interesting. They eat differently than a lot of us do.
Well, if you train a lot, you can eat a lot. We've talked about that before. So the energy balance works a couple ways. We need more energy to exercise more. We need more energy to fuel the adaptation that comes post-exercise. So it makes sense that if we're doing a bunch of work, we should be eating more, not less.
Totally.
Jeff Kabush, he's got some lean, low body fat. That's some life goals for me. It just looks like you've take saran wrap and you stretch it around a piece of meat or something. He is so low body fat.
Yeah.
Someone on the Reddit forum, there's a Reddit r/TrainerRoad, and they asked about my carb intake, and we got a little discussion there about because someone questioned how can you do 6 to 8 grams of carbs eating fruits and vegetables? Why can't we just eat pizza or something like that? And someone said you realize how much spinach that is. Yeah. And it's not. You can think about it. Those vegetables are very important too, but to get the amount of calories in that kind of stuff, you can do sweet potatoes. Corn,
find more calorie dense
full
vegetables.
power, starchy vegetables, starches, beans, whole wheat. So there's a way to get enough calories, because or else you can get if you just try to do it all through carrots and mushrooms, exactly. You can't
physically cannot eat that.
You cannot eat that much, right?
Impossible.
Yeah. One of my favorite things now, you guys seen it. I just cook a sweet potato and you just eat it like a burrito. Yeah. Leave off everything else on it.
Sweet potatoes are a wonder food.
Yeah,
I love them.
So 2 more points from Martin. One is, it can be you're training more and you're getting weight gain. you're definitely eating more calories. Like, that's a fact. It's not just coming from nowhere.
Did he specify? I mean, do we know what his weight gain is? Did he say anything about? Okay, so could be some muscle in there.
Could be muscles, yeah. But either way, you have to have
could be
more
endurance
food.
adaptation that packs more glycogen into that muscle, so the muscle's getting heavier with water and glycogen. That's desirable.
So it could be okay, but I'm just saying it. But he has to have some kind of addition into his system in order for him to gain weight, even if it is desirable weight.
Yeah.
Some people don't realize that, like, you go to Starbucks and you get a little pastry after your ride because you had a big ride, or a Costco muffin, which is one of the worst offenders. Costco muffin, for those who are not in the U.S., they're like a huge, decent-sized muffin. They're delicious. Yeah. Those are 1,000 calories.
It's horrible quality carbohydrate, too.
Pastries you can get from like a pastry shop, easy 400, 500, 600 calories.
And it's just not high quality.
But
you eat one of those, though.
Calories aside, the hormonal impact of those things and what they do, that big infusion of blood glucose means a big release of insulin, means a whole lot of, and if we're exercising athletes, that's pretty good. That's not necessarily a bad thing, because we have that high insulin sensitivity in our muscles. We've trained that into them. But for sedentary folk, that's especially bad. It just encourages insulin resistance and pre-diabetes, diabetes, and
if you're gonna do the Costco muffin, make it like as soon as you get off the bike or during the ride.
Just have earned it. I mean,
but I mean,
and there are better ways to go.
Just the fact. My point is that I bet if he did a food log the whole week, he would see these little things like that. And you do a couple of those a week. If you did one of them a day, you'd easily gain a pound each week just from the extra fat to an extent.
You're saying if you ate one of those a day.
Yeah, exactly.
Not if you did a food log a day.
But that is a common first step, and an excellent way to go is chart your food intake. Do it for a week. It's a pain, I'll tell you what. It's a pain to do it for a few days.
I did it for 3 months.
It's super very illuminating.
Oh yeah, for sure. And absolutely. You learn. I can now like look at food and pretty well guess what the caloric intake is.
And that's all good and fine, but you can also you start to learn, or you start to recognize, wow, I'm eating a lot of crap. Wow, I ate no vegetables yesterday. I mean, you start to see overt things, you start to recognize trends, and if you can tie that food log to your performance and see what's happening with your TSS chart and is my FTP going up, and start making those relations, that's when it becomes extremely useful.
The only vegetable that you eat is French fries.
Right? Exactly.
Technically still a vegetable, but you shouldn't count it.
That was one of my closing points, and we've covered a lot of them, but exercise does not excuse a poor diet. I'm looking at you, Brandon. His donut intake is daunting. It freaks me out.
He's one of our product managers.
He's extremely fit. I mean, he's like world-class fit, but some of his dietary choices worry me.
No, this is a good example of why you can't just look at what other people do. Because Brandon, they might even be listening to this live, but Brandon has world-class genetics. Like he was at the Olympic Training Center, professional. He's 5.3 watts per kilo, fastest hill climber here, drops
Ted King.
Ted King keeps up with Lita Leipheimer.
He and Peter Stettin battle for KOMs.
Yeah, exactly. But he eats. We make fun of him. Mac and cheese and Mount Rose, which is a climb here. That's all he needs. And then he eats like 2 donuts a day. He's doing lots of work. But we keep arguing with him that if you just would eat the same amount as healthy food, you'd be at like 5.6 watts per kilo. He would be probably a domestic,
more healthy.
That's
too.
The other thing, And
well, these have long-term impacts. And while he's doing a whole lot of work, he can get away with these things. But if his lifestyle ever shifts, that's going to be an issue right there. He's establishing habits, and not just to pick on Brandon. People who do this are establishing habits that are going to carry into later stages of life. Not to mention metabolic disorder and endurance athletes. Don't incur it as much as sedentary people because, again, we maintain a high level of insulin sensitivity because we force our bodies into a state that requires it. But metabolic disorder takes a long time to cultivate. I mean, we're talking 10, 15, 20 years. It's not something that you change your diet for a short while and, oh, my God, I'm pre-diabetic. I need to change things. No, it creeps up on you. And this damage is hard set.
I think so Brandon can handle a whole bunch of work. And what got into his head on this is he was at the Olympic Training Center and a nutritionalist was working with everyone. He got to Brandon. Brandon's extremely light and extremely skinny. And he was losing too much weight with the amount of training they were doing. Yeah. And she said, you eat whatever you want. Just eat as much food because he just couldn't eat physically enough calories. Goes back to the mushrooms and spinach kind of thing. Sure. But now to your point, getting a little older, not doing it. He's still extremely light, but I trying to get them to eat
Part
better.
of me is envious to be able to stay that lean and be able to eat literally
Sure,
4
right?
donuts at once.
Yeah, just like
Indulgence is
4
nice.
4 doughboys.
and then like 3 packets of mac and cheese.
I like the way that
his engine burns hot. That's clear.
I like the way that you've kind of phrased too your takeaways, Chad, is using diet to address the general good health and body composition, and then make exercise about improving performance.
And it's hard to see. You can't separate those things. There's too much overlap. But it does help to step back and try to see your diet as being about one thing, general good health, and your exercise as being about one other thing, performance.
You know what's really cool about this is that if you are going about this in a sensible manner like we're talking about, your quality of life is going to go up for now and beyond. And on top of that, you'll also be faster. So it's not like it takes away.
And you'll have less
it does take away perhaps from your indulgence, right? And your
you know what though?
desire to do
when
that.
you do it a while and then you eat that Big Mac, the Big Mac tastes
It's
disgusting.
terrible.
It does
Terrible.
change.
But before, it tasted so good.
And you also start to
totally.
learn how certain foods make you feel. I mean, you used to eat that McDonald's meal and you'd feel crappy afterwards, but you didn't have any basis for comparison. You started eating better. You start feeling
baseline
better
is
as a result of it.
Yeah.
Then you go back to that. Yeah, I mean, you can just look at that Big Mac and go, nah, I know how I'm going to feel afterwards. It's not worth it.
And donuts on that specific line, I hadn't had a donut since 5th grade until like 2 months ago.
So good,
and I
though.
tried half of one and I couldn't even finish it. They aren't good.
You know what? Ice cream now, I love eating ice cream, but I've realized ice cream makes me feel terrible.
Yeah.
It's one of my favorite foods, but when I eat it, I just feel horrible.
Same here.
It's a cruel world.
It is, man. Let's jump into Adam's question. This is going to be the last one that we'll cover here. And then if you're with us on the live stream, you can stick with us and we'll answer some of the questions that you submitted.
Do one unscientific thing first?
Sure,
It'll be sure.
sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
Completely unscientific, but I want someone else to do, let's do a non-scientific study.
Okay.
I think there's something special about red bell peppers, like the sweet little red bell peppers.
Yeah.
Some people on here eat those all the time, and let me know if you can't train more. That's I don't know if there's probably, I don't know what there is on about
That's
it.
your
but
new magic pill?
That's my placebo.
Yeah.
As I eat red bell
They're
peppers, and I
delicious
think
and they're
that my
loaded with all
legs,
sorts of good stuff. It's a
Yeah.
really watery vegetable, so they help
Yeah.
with hydration on top of it all.
I think that my legs recover better when I eat red bell peppers, but it's not scientific, and I agree, it's 100% in my head. But if I can get it into your head too, that you believe it, this is like a cult. The cult of the red bell pepper.
So it sounds
Right?
like a book.
No,
So we've got tart cherry juice. We've got your
You
red
know
bell
what? No,
peppers.
tart
People
cherry juice
know
tastes good.
exactly what you need.
I don't know if there's any performance increase, but I know it tastes
It's
good.
delicious.
Consult with your doctor before you embark on this study.
I know someone's
We're
going to have
move on to Adam's question. He says, "Hey guys, I love your podcast and TrainerRoad, which I've been using since August 2017, and the new updates of the TSS charts are a very nice addition." Awesome, good to hear. If anybody doesn't know, we released a whole bunch of updates to TrainerRoad where you can analyze your outdoor rides, your indoor rides, lots of cool stuff. So you can check that out, TrainerRoad.com. Anyways, okay, he says, I've long battled cramps during races, and last week I entered a 3-hour mountain bike race and tried everything I could to prevent cramping. This part's really important. He says, I hydrated well for several days before the race, took in more than usual on the bike nutrition, and he says he had Scratch Labs drink mix, gels, waffles. I got in a decent warm-up and so forth. Nevertheless, both quads locked up badly during my second lap, causing me to stop for several minutes before I limped back to the pit area. During the first lap, I stayed in the middle of a big train of riders and kept up a great pace through fast, flowy trail. Being so absorbed in that train, I didn't notice right away that my seat post started to slip. And by the time I finally realized that it had slipped, it was already an inch lower than my normal position. So he asks, could pedaling at that compromised position for a couple miles have contributed to the cramps quite badly? Then he says there were 2 other factors. He says, for sure, it was a fairly hot, humid day in Georgia, and I made perhaps the ill-advised decision to run my single speed. He says, although he did gear down to an easier ratio than what he normally uses on his single speed. He says, however, the course is well suited to single speeding. The longest climb lasted about 2 minutes. Everything else is pretty easy rolling terrain, easier than what I normally ride on a single speed, so I could. So he asks, so could the slip post have had such an impact? This is interesting because you battled cramps last year, Chad, and you aren't dealing with them at the same level now, correct?
Yeah, true. Yeah, and the bummer of this is we don't have anything definitive that says cramping is due to this. Mm-hmm. So all we can do is speculate and make our best guesses. For a while, I insisted it was just overstimulation of the muscle. Lately, I've been taxing my body in the same way, and I mean, I'm not having cramps. And the most notable change is my hydration, and I'm actually measuring my urine specific gravity to see, something more definitive. Not just do I feel hydrated? Is my urine straw color? All those things aren't as telling as people give them credit. And I've just been keeping closer ties.
How do you measure your urine?
You got a whiz on a stick, a little reagent strip.
So where do you get that?
Anywhere. Amazon, they're super cheap. You can get a ton of them. I think it's like $150 for, I can't quite remember, but it couldn't have been more than $10, $15.
You just gave Nate an additional data point. His eyes are lighting up.
It is a useful data point.
So we have a urinal at TrainerRoad, and I imagine there's box of strips above. So how do you what do you do it, and how do you look for it?
You just okay. Let me scroll down to my notes here. It's just a little strip of paper, and it measures a whole number of things. I've been looking at other things just because it's interesting, but I haven't been charting anything other than my hydration levels. But basically, you pee on this little strip, and over a certain amount of time, the colors change, and they indicate just how hydrated you are. In the case of specific gravity, distilled water has a specific gravity of 1.0. If you're normal body weight or body water, it's a very narrow range. And when you fall outside of that range, when the color is a certain color and you line it up with a little color chart, you can see, I'm perhaps a little dehydrated. I'm very dehydrated. It's definitive and objective, and it can tell you. You can start to shape your diet and see. One of the things I've changed also is my on the bike nutrition. A lot of the times I just had water. Now I'm using water with a little bit of glucose, a little bit of sodium, and I'm not cramping during the workouts. On the longer rides, same deal. I'm using these co-transporters to actually get the fluid into my cells. I'm also eating slightly differently in that I don't dump a bunch of carbohydrate into my stomach and expect my system simply to be able to deal with that. I recognize that there's a thermoregulatory cost, that water in the body is being diverted to different areas, which maybe aren't as productive as they could be for performance, and which is something I want to talk about here.
So Nate's really excited.
We're getting those strips, and it's going to be a shelf.
Excited.
Let's do it. Just buy some.
Simple as can
this.
be, and then just chart it. And
we just have make sure. We already have I hope everyone knows the wash your hands afterwards rule, but we should be.
Well, you can
double down,
guys. It's a little easier to pee on the strip than on yourself, and we can aim it a little more.
Let's cover his question of can the slip seat post do it? Absolutely. Slip seat post by an inch? Yeah, totally.
That's the biggest one
for sure. And he said he went to a different gearing combination. One's a little easier than usual. So does this mean he's spinning a little more quickly than he's used to?
And add on to that he was doing that in a group that was moving, in a group that was moving quickly. He says, right? They were carrying great pace. So as a result, you've geared down. Now you're spinning at a way higher cadence than you're used to.
Yeah. So look at your overall cadence over the course of the ride. Is this? I mean, if you usually hover around 90 RPM, yet for this ride you were hovering closer to high 90s, 100. I'm not sure what gear ratio you landed on, but that's just more repetitions, more muscular contractions.
It would be beneficial on single speed to use non-zero cadence, so then you can understand, because there's a lot of coasting on a single speed, and that will affect the data. So you'd want to know what what the cadence is when you're pedaling, not just overall. Something to think about though. So I've noticed, and this is once again, this is like you were talking about with the red peppers. Well, this is my deal now. So when I think about cramps happen. It's pretty common. You were going into this and you said that you were preparing specifically, you were waging war beforehand on these cramps, right? So you hydrated well for several days, took in more than usual on the bike nutrition, got in a decent warm up, and you were really focusing. It sounds like, Adam, you're focusing on not cramping. And it's just like when you focus on not hitting that tree that you're going to hit. So you just stare at that tree and you focus on that tree, you hit it. But I've noticed that, at the Segundo, for example, I was riding along. The pace wasn't extremely hard. It was just a consistent all-day sort of pace. I got into that final climb, and I genuinely thought, man, this would be a terrible spot to cramp. Hard final climb. And then the muscles started going, hey, it started tingling and started to twinge.
Why not? I mean, it's a theory that you can lump in with the rest of them. And
exactly.
There's
a lot to be said for mental focus, for what you're focusing on, and your ability to, your body's ability to direct resources or handle neurotransmission, whatever it is. You've got some control over that. And I've noticed, at least in my personal experience, I've noticed a trend in that, where if I'm really worried about that sort of thing or really focusing on it, it's there, it's present.
Well, yes. So the two things that I lean most towards in this case is, one, is your hydration actually effective? Just because you're drinking a bunch of water doesn't mean you're necessarily hydrated. Just because you're anticipating over the few days prior to the event and drinking excess water does not necessarily mean you're exceptionally well hydrated. And then you talk about all the on the bike nutrition that you took in. Some of that doesn't metabolize all that well, especially if you're dehydrated.
Totally.
So the combination of those two things could lead to it. But again, I mean, it could just be a matter of overstimulated muscle. You're spinning at a quicker RPM that you're used to. It's a hot day. You're doing a lot of work. So at some point, you outpace your muscle's capacity to keep up.
And to be clear, I find the most merit in that, at least in my personal experience. You know, I just threw out the anecdote that I have with focus, but I find that that's the biggest thing for me. You know, assuming that hydration is where it is or anything else. But man, when I put my muscles through something that they are not prepared for.
Yeah, but I can say now that my nutrition and hydration are far more dialed than they were in the last couple of years, I've seen less cramping.
There we go.
I mean, there's a correlation, but I don't know if that's...
I don't think just one thing causes cramps.
That's
you know what I mean?
So
Sure.
And that's why I think it's so hard for scientists to figure it out. This is there's like two levels of cramps. First level, if hydration, nutrition, and heat aren't factors, like those are all dialed and it's not this crazy hot day.
Right.
Then I think there's a second level where it's different intensity than you usually experience or a different position.
Totally.
And if it sounds like, I forget his name, Adam on this one, he had intensity with the single speed, right? That's a different intensity than you're normally used to, and a slip saddle. That like makes me think 100% that
the slip saddle. I mean, it could be so minor, but if you're habituated to a particular position and you've done thousands and thousands and thousands of repetitions in that position, hour upon hour in that position, even a subtle change can be pretty impactful.
Totally.
I have another theory that some more experienced riders, like Coach Shad, who are distinguished.
Yes.
I like both those words.
If you've been at a high level for, let's say you had a high level of a lot of capacity, and then you have a dip in fitness for a little bit, and then as you come back, I'm thinking that you can go deeper in those races, and your muscles just aren't ready for it, and then they cramp.
Completely agree with that.
I don't know if that's ever been looked at, but I totally think it happens.
Oh yeah. You're familiar with going with that pace or going that deep, whatever else it may be.
Or your aerobic system can take it, but your muscles just can't.
Yep.
And they're not used to it. Again, going back to my intensity argument, and they freak out.
Oh yeah.
That's why it happens in racing and not training.
Yeah.
Is because you go deeper than normal.
Push to new heights. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
In other words, be prepared,
depths,
and
whatever.
that's the best way to avoid cramps. Being prepared.
Be prepared. Would you like train more?
Prepared as
I'm
you
just saying
can.
across the board, right?
Yeah.
You know, and there are a number of different things, but once again, with cramps, it's not just a simple. There's not one easy trick that's an infomercial style trick, that you can just get by and take care of. Yeah. We don't really know, but the best thing that we can say is that, when you prepare on multiple fronts and make sure that, your body is prepared for the type of work that you're going to do, and you've prepared in terms of nutritionally speaking, you're set up.
And we're all subject to it. I mean, who do we watch at the end of Pyrenees or one of those, even Wout van Aert at the end of Strade Bianchi.
Yep.
He had pushed so hard that when he fell off of his bike, watching him jump back onto his cross bike was downright ugly.
His legs
and
didn't
he
work.
is one of the best in the world at doing that very thing. But he was so spazzed out with cramps that it was...
They didn't work.
Yeah, he had pushed to that point. So it happens to all of us. It doesn't matter your level.
Absolutely does. And you don't have to be pushing extremely hard for cramps to hit either. Some people they certainly, it's much more common, but I'm sure somebody's listening to this thinking, but I get cramps and I'm not pushing hard. Once again, it all comes down to that preparation across the board. Plenty of things you can do. So perfect. Well, thanks everybody. And if you're on the live stream, stick with us. If you're just listening through the podcast, thank you. And you can submit your training questions at trainerroad.com/podcast. Check out the Facebook group that we have. Just search for the Trainer Road podcast group. You'll find it on there. We'll talk to you all next week.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye-bye.
All right.
Is it live off? Or it's not off?
No, we're still live.
Can you guys field questions for just long enough for me
sure
to
thing.
get to the bathroom?
Yep. Sounds good. All right. Okay. I'll handle YouTube. Do you want to handle Facebook, Nate?
I will.
Cool.
Okay, can you talk about cadence for your time trial, especially a flat and fast one like your target event? Is there any recommended range, or is it entirely personal? This one, I know what Chad will say with this is that it is the studies show that self-selected cadence gets you the fastest. So I don't think any of us are aiming for 80, 110, 90. It's just how we feel the easiest to put out power. Is that right?
Totally. Yeah. Like I've noticed actually this year I've been making a concerted effort to train at a slightly lower cadence because I looked at all the data from last year, and whenever I like exploded in a race or anything else like that, there were I wasn't fit enough. Right. But the one thing that I recognize is that when I was on those really steep mountain biking climbs or anything else like that, where my cadence is mandatorily drugged down, it really hurt me quickly. Like I really started to drop. So I've actually, anticipating Leadville has some steep climbs and some long ones, I've actually been training at a lower cadence. You can train yourself into that self-selected range, whatever else it is. I noticed that on the TT bike, I'm somewhere around and I don't ever aim for anything, but I'm usually around 94 RPM for an average. And then on the mountain bike and everything else, I'm usually somewhere around lower than that, but in the 90s still.
Chad, for the TT, are you shooting for a specific cadence or... You are?
Well, I've gravitated toward one, so I figured that's the one I'm going to employ. But I
told you he'd say that.
I have some. I'm going to experiment with some lower cadences just to see how that affects power and perceived effort.
Yeah,
cool.
Most of the harder efforts I've been doing recently, I was just saying for Leadville training and everything else that I've been doing, because I anticipate some low cadence, long stuff there. I've been doing intervals at 80, 75 RPM where I'm. And just
I've been doing some of that too, if nothing more than to break the workout up, but also just to expose myself to different forms of muscular stress.
Totally. Yeah.
Andrew asks, Wahoo, climb integration. Planning on making climb-specific workouts. Reason I ask is I imagine doing 30-30s on, 30 seconds on, 30 seconds off will be rodeo time. And how the kicker climbs can be integrated with TrainerRoad is based on your target power, it'll either go up or down. So 30-30s, when it is intensity time, you'll go up high, and then if not, you'll go down. But the nice thing is it has a remote control, and you can set it yourself, and that will override. So if you set it, it'll override what TrainerRoad does. So if you just want to set it to like a 4% grade, you can do that. But there's not like a specific climbing workout. Yeah, we do that we talk about that all the time. I just saw again on the Reddit forum, someone says, how do I get it to be like Alpe d'Huez? And smart listeners said, got a 60, 90-minute workout and ride like right below threshold.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah, that's it.
That is Alpe d'Huez right there, depending on how fast you are. And the goal is to put more power out for the same amount of time, not to necessarily ride a virtual course faster.
Totally.
So you don't need to ride Alpe d'Huez. You don't need to ride Alpe d'Huez once. And this for new riders, it's hard, right?
Totally.
You don't have to ride Alpe d'Huez once to be able to do an amazing time up Alpe d'Huez. You don't need to practice Alpe d'Huez. You need to put out a lot of power for that time range.
Yeah. Exactly right. Yep. Yeah, there's better ways to train. Caleb asks, crank length for a road racer. I'm 6 foot tall and previously rode 175 millimeter cranks, but now I'm on 172.5 millimeter cranks. I appreciate the more aggressive fit, but wonder about my power if it's suffering. What are your thoughts on this? Do you want to chime in on the crank length thing? I have thoughts and strong opinions. But
it's pretty unlikely a change that subtle is going to have any real impact.
Yeah.
Just say it. And there's nothing that really... I mean, if you go from, say, maybe 185s down to 170s, that's enough of a difference that it might have an actual effect on your riding and your power output. But we're talking just
2.5 millimeters.
Slightest change.
It's not a lot. Like, it makes such a big deal out of it all the
subtle
time, right?
That I've had bikes that I've ridden. I'll go from one bike to another bike to another bike, and years down the road look and recognize that one was a 175 and one was a 172.5 or even a 170.
Yeah.
It just made no impact.
When you change socks and you have thicker socks, that makes as much difference as the 175 to 172.5.
Well, yeah, I mean, a different stack height. You change shoes,
Totally.
you get different cleats, you get and pedals. I mean, things like that change, and that difference that you're concerning yourself with right here is a wash.
So I find the crank length debate to be just like placebo, or not placebo, but what's the red herring, like mecca, basically. Like a lot of people, they switch their crank length and then they have their best ride ever. And they're like, it's the cranks. It was the crank length. That's what did it. But it's so hard to isolate so many variables. I've ridden on 175s, 172.5s, 170s. I've settled on 170s just because I prioritize mountain biking and I don't like pedal strikes. There's a very practical reason where I just like to, even though it's very small, but hey, millimeters can count when you're talking about hitting rocks, right?
Yeah, and maybe if you're in a aggressively aerodynamic position and the knee's going to come up 5 centimeters or 5 millimeters higher, maybe it could be argued that there'd be an impact there. I can't imagine it, but
no, yeah. So it's interesting. A lot of people, I think, just put more stake into it than what I see in terms of how it actually delivers in actuality.
So I've had the biggest swing. I went from 175 on my TT bike to 165 to try to open up the hip angle.
Yeah.
And looking at workouts, same power output, no difference.
No change in perceived exertion.
No, you have to spin differently, having the shorter cranks. But other than that, like once I got used to it, it didn't make me any faster.
Did it even change your cadence?
Yeah, it does.
Down, even after you
believe you have to go. Which way is it? Up? I think you have to go faster.
Sure.
Yeah, higher cadence.
Yeah, makes sense.
Yeah,
smaller.
Yep.
Right? Smaller circle you're spinning. Yeah, I don't think it's too big of a deal, Caleb. The one thing I would just caution people with crank length is if you're going to try to put a lot of stock in an improvement or a decrease in performance into crank length, make sure you're measuring everything before you just chalk it up to just that.
And a word of caution, if you've planned to submit this to a forum, it's a pretty loaded question.
Oh yeah, you're going to get some very interesting opinions on it for sure.
Darren asks, he says, "Hi, I have a long endurance event coming up with a 6:30 a.m. start. I've been testing having a big breakfast of oats and bananas with some other bits in it, but juicing it so I can drink it. I don't know how you juice oats, but
I wonder.
The idea being that it's easier to digest. It seems to work okay from 2 test rides where I had it 1 hour before my ride. I don't really want to get up at 3:30 to eat 3 hours before the event. Any thoughts?"
Yeah, I think that we covered like a really similar question to this.
Just because it's easier to digest doesn't make it better. That means you're getting more energy into the system at a more rapid rate. So this
is an hour before, though.
Yeah.
I would argue on this since I would say with Darren, this is pretty individual, but how much you can take, like me and Jonathan. Yeah. If he's done it before 2 test rides and it felt good, I would go with that.
Totally.
Don't, especially get him at 3:30.
Yeah,
but we did talk about the fact that just because it's a big event doesn't mean you need to have a big breakfast. Totally. Have a substantial or a sufficient breakfast, but putting a bunch of money. I did this at Segundo, putting a bunch of food in my belly and then trying to ride that first hour was really uncomfortable.
But was that the quesadilla, the bacon quesadilla?
No, that was later.
Or the tequila. No. You don't load the morning of by itself.
No. Oh yeah.
But if you can take a lot, you should do it. But I remember, Chris, I can do it. So I can take a lot and I have good workouts, but it's totally different than other people. But I'm also loading ahead of time. Yeah. I remember Chrissy Wellington, she's won such a dominant triathlete, right? And won Kona a bunch of times, set a bunch of records. Before her race, she would say, she's, I think, British. She would say, I had 2 English muffins with a bit of peanut butter before an Ironman. That's it. Yep. Right. And
she
maybe a banana too.
She was pre-nourished and she was going to nourish on
totally
all over throughout the course of the event.
I'd argue
the thing I was talking about, right?
Yeah. I'd argue too that she probably had done that every morning before every workout, many times in many years, and she wasn't saying for this specific one. I bet I'd be really surprised too if she never tried to eat a big bunch of oats or 4 English muffins.
Sure, she tried it.
Yeah, exactly. And that for her, it was the best.
Yeah. Carlos says, great podcast. Quick question. I suppose it's a very common one. Does your size constrain your peak FTP or top FTP? So I assume he's talking about like your potential FTP. Yeah. What would you say to that?
I'm sure total muscle mass will impose some limitation on just how high you can push your FTP. Yeah. And there has to at some point, if you've pushed it up bioenergetically or metabolically as high as that fitness can go, the only way you're going to increase it further is to add more muscle mass and condition that muscle mass. That muscle mass has to be conditioned appropriately too. So, yeah, I mean, there's got to be a ceiling, and I definitely see that as being one of them.
Yeah, but in the end, FTP isn't the only determinant of your performance on the road, right? I mean, look at Caleb Ewan, for example, versus Marcel Kittel. Like Caleb Ewan, I think that he puts out like 1,400 watts in a sprint, and Marcel Kittel puts out like 2,200 or something. And you see those guys going head to head all the time. So, it comes down to not only power to weight, even it comes down to so much more on how you execute on the day. So it's a good metric to track. But
someone asked, if oval chain rings provide so many benefits, why don't the pros use them? And really, the benefits that Jonathan was saying too was the marketing. Like this is what they say marketing wise.
Yes.
Like I don't know if it's
In fact, there are studies that show like both sides of the coin, really, in terms of like oval rings.
Yeah. And you said it well. You said this is what they say it does.
This is what they say it does.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's and I'm a skeptic. I use them. I'm a skeptic in terms of like the aid in biomechanical efficiency. However, I'm not a skeptic at all. And in fact, I'm a believer in terms of their ability to deliver smoother torque delivery. That's like mechanical makes sense.
I completely agree with that.
I like the Chad, like he said, he used them. He doesn't have any knee pains. So just keep using
That's
them.
a great reason.
Right? Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And plenty of pros use them. You're seeing more and more mountain bikers use them now. The ovals. Yeah. I mean, there was BioPace back in the day, and that was a different oval. They had it backwards from what most people have these days.
Wayne Christopher uses them. And
Wiggins did.
He's not so bad.
There are plenty of them.
He's pretty good.
I think Tony Martin
did for a while. I don't know if he still does. He might. I can't remember.
I think Fabian Cancellara was always on round, I believe. So, it's all just a... Yeah, it's very, like we said, very personal. So.
Derek asks, love the new analytics. Are you working on a calendar feature so I can ditch another company? Yes, we are. And it's actually going really well.
You're joining into our meetings.
And it's actually far enough along where we're using it internally.
It's pretty awesome.
We're trying to get that out as quickly as possible because that's a hole. We don't have a calendar. But it's awesome.
Let's see. From R. El Musli. I hope that's how you say the name. Not sure. It's YouTube name, so you never know if I'm actually like saying something like Bart Simpson is prank calling me type of thing. I don't know. But he says, hey guys, love the podcast as always. Any comments on stability on the TT bike? Currently, I kind of pull up on my extensions and press with my elbows on the pads. Would you recommend that? Any other tips? How do you feel like there's a lot of tension through your arms like that when you're riding, Chad, in your position?
Only when I'm pulling hard. If I'm trying to generate a little extra power to get up over a climb sort of thing or a rise, that's the only time I ever have actual tension on the hands. I know some riders do like to, what do they call it, choking up, where they kind of wrap their wrists around and they think that develops greater, stability, helps.
Or aerodynamic efficiency.
I see that being exactly backwards. I think you're pulling power out of the pedals. So I've never been an advocate of it.
I just heard some Giro commenters say that you can't like torque the bars when you're in the TT bar. So therefore you can't go as fast as a climbing position. Like you need to like climb. Like exactly. I don't know about that either.
Hey, it's not that sort of effort though. It's a really even effort.
I know. That's why I was like confused,
baffled
why they said that.
When I'm in the TT position, I could like twirl pencils between my fingers. They're just 100% relaxed.
Yeah, I can't imagine a long course or an ultra distance triathlete being on the bike and having that sort of tension on the bars all day long.
It's going to suck power, like you said, and then on top of that, it's going to cause so much tension through your arms, your back, your neck. You're going to get very possibly headaches from keeping that sort of tension.
I could see track riders.
For sure.
Who are doing
with extreme efforts.
Hard efforts.
Yep. And I can't even say for sure that's the case, but that's where it would make sense to me.
And I think that like something that is just needs to be hit home endlessly with bicycle riding in general, but the TT position, especially because you're in a position usually with more leverage over the front of the bike, is you do not control the bike with your hands. You never do. You control that bike through your legs and through your pelvis and where you're sitting there. And your upper body's draped more or less over the rest of it, and that goes for mountain biking, that goes for road riding, that goes for when you're on a TT bike. If you're panicked because your hands aren't tense and really grabbing on, then that's bad. Your position's bad, or your strength, you're not sufficiently strong or coordinated to be able to hold that position. You can remedy that. YouTube.com/TrainerRoad. Chad has stretches and all that stuff for it.
Thanks, Jonathan.
Yeah.
Michael says, this is I'm going to make this a general plan adjustment question.
Sure.
You're doing a build, then a specialty, and you have a week of vacation during the build. Do you take a week out of the build plan or a week out of the specialty plan?
Either one. I mean, it's a single week, so it's probably not going to be that big of a deal. Obviously, he's missing a week, so I would try to align it with a recovery. Well, you can have that option, yeah. I don't think it's going to have a big impact either way. I don't think it's not anything to lose sleep over.
I was thinking that maybe, sorry, Jonathan, that you would take, if you were going to take it out of the build or the specialty, you would take out one of the bigger weeks because these things build on each other. And taking out the lesser week and then jumping to a bigger week can crush you.
So that for sure applies to if you're going to modify the build phase. If you're going to modify the specialty phase, the weeks are pretty even stress, but as it gets toward the end of the plan, it gets really specific in terms of your tapering and you know.
So don't take those out.
Yeah, I wouldn't mess with those final 4 weeks or final 3 weeks if I didn't have to.
Yeah, I agree. And then the one thing I would add to that is like if you feel like you're ramping up and doing well on the build phase and you still have some room to grow, so to
That's
speak.
another thing. Yeah, if you're riding a wave, it'd be hard to mess with that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, ride that. And then just hopefully you can get into that specialty phase. And that also doesn't mean that you can't, if you remove that 1 week, it's not like you're only allotted one change that you can make, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like if you remove that 1 week from whatever phase, you know, that doesn't mean that you can change things down the road.
Yeah.
You know, pay attention to your body as usual. We went long on this one. We have lots of questions, and we'll get to them thereafter. We'll try to answer all of them if possible. Not right now, but Ian and I, our producer, will get to answering those. We should probably cut it off at that point. It's been a long one.
Okay.
Thanks, everybody, for joining us. Remember, the Ask a Cycling Coach podcast Facebook group. You can join in there. Please head over, join the group. We'll approve you. I promise. All of us will. We'll approve you in, and then keep your eye out for some cool content in there. We'll talk to you all next week.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye-bye.